2914 God Punishment Sword. It looks like other creatures have been here but not for long. Otherwise, even if they cleared the xenogeniacs, more xenogeniacs would be coming. Han-san was becoming more curious. The ability to come to the big barren systems, kill xenogeniacs, and do the cleanup was not something an average deified could do. One of the cleaners must have been a true god elite, and a strong one at that. Han-san kept looking around as he flew forward. If other people had been there, it meant Han-san was on the right path. Although he did not know if he could find Little Flower, he knew he was sure to find something. The gray dust was everywhere. The whole of space looked as if it was snowing. The scene was extremely weird. After flying for a short while, a giant planet appeared in front of him. That planet was like 3 Loga planets, but that planet had a big treasure sword going through it. The treasure sword was so big that one was unable to imagine it. It was like a fruit knife cutting through an apple. It cut through the whole planet. That is a big sword. What kind of creature can wield it? Why is the sword cutting through the planet? Why did the planet not explode? Han-san was looking at the planet and big treasure sword. Because the area was covered in thick, white dust, the real appearance of the planet and big treasure sword were not visible. Han-san was only able to see the shape of it. He could not make out the details. Han-san used his Dongxian aura to get a look at the planet and sword. He quickly realized that it was not an ordinary planet. It was a man-made planet. The structures inside were all man-made. It was no wonder a sword went through it without the planet exploding. Han-san walked in front of the big treasure sword and reached out his hand. The big sword was covered with white dust. The dust quickly fell, revealing the sword's true appearance. Surprisingly, the big sword was a stone sword. It looked like granite. Han-san reached out his hand and flicked the sword. He noted how hard its texture was. Han-san's finger was unable to break the stone. He left a finger mark on it. Compared to the giant treasure sword, it was tiny. This feels like a rock for sure, but this rock is a bit too hard. Han-san looked at the big treasure sword with shock. He tried to pull the big treasure sword away, but it felt extremely heavy. With his current power, he was unable to break it. It was like it was frozen in the air. It is no wonder it has been sticking in here. No one can move it. Han-san was looking at the big treasure sword and thought, I suppose these things are the leftovers from the big fight that toppled Sacred. As for these things that have been left behind, did they belong to Sacred or the enemy? Han-san was ready to keep on moving, when he suddenly frowned. He flashed away, and entered a hiding spot on the planet. Not long after, he saw some movement in space. 4 or 5 people broke space and arrived. They quickly approached the big treasure sword. Han-san was looking at these people. He noticed the leader of the squad was Ancient Abyss Grandmaster from the Extreme King. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster. Why is he here? Han-san did not know the other people from the Extreme King. Judging from their presence, they were likely deified class. Their level was not low either. The Extreme King really does have many elites. I have never seen these guys before. Yet they are already butterfly class. Why are they following Ancient Abyss Grandmaster into the big barren systems? What are they doing? Are these the people who have been clearing out the xenogeniacs here? Han-san was confused. The group of people did not go for the big treasure sword. It seemed as if they were just stopping by. They were headed in the same direction as Han Sr. An Extreme King deified elite looked at the big treasure sword and asked, Mr. Grandmaster, is this the God Punishment Sword from the legends? Ancient Abyss Grandmaster looked at the big treasure sword and said, Yes, this is the God Punishment Sword. It is a weapon wielded by gods. It is a shame that it belongs to the gods. It is not very useful for Sacred, which was destroyed, but many gods died here. Whoever owned this God Punishment Sword was killed by a Sacred elite. Since nobody has been able to move it, the sword has stayed here for more than 1,000,000 years. The legends say that aside from the god spirits, no creature has been able to remove this sword, the deified elite said. Is that true? If one was able to move it, the sword would not have remained here for such a long time. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster paused and said, The dust was recently moved. It looks like there are some other elites ahead of us. Han-san thought. He was examining the big treasure sword, but he's not interested in it. He is looking at the track I made. It is lucky I used the Dongxian aura to erase all evidence of my presence. I should not leave any trace of myself here. Would it be Sky Palace leader? The deified elite suggested. I do not think so. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster shook his head. He looked at the big treasure sword and said, let's go. We cannot get left behind. After Ancient Abyss Grandmaster and the others were gone, Han Sun exited the planet. The leader of Sky Palace? Is that the one we met in the sanctuary's door? The Extreme King and Sky Palace's people are here. What are they coming here for? Han Sun was a bit curious. Suddenly Han Sun frowned. He looked into the distance and said, if the Grandmaster is here, I do not have to hide. I noticed you were hiding here. I thought you would not want to meet me, so I did not want to disturb you. In space, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster's body slowly appeared. He was like an invisible man. Grandmaster, you are so caring. Well, I have to go now. Han Sun turned around and prepared to leave. Please stay, Godfather Han, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster said. Since you are here in the Big Baron systems, you must have a purpose. Can you tell me why you are here? While the two were talking, the other 4 deified elites came flying back. They recognized Han Sun, and were shocked to see Han Senator. The Han Sun they knew was the crystallizer Godfather Han, who killed destroyed leader. It was not the Han Sun that disguised himself as a prince of the Extreme King. Regarding Han Sen's disguise as an Extreme King prince, while they had heard about it before, they did not care about it much. They were going to surround Han Senator once they knew it was him. They hesitated. They decided against trying to surround him. If this was an ordinary deified elite, even a true god elite, they would not be afraid with Grandmaster's presence there. They knew that during a recent battle, Han Sun had turned burning lamp into dust. That scene had been shocking, thus they were quite afraid. They had practiced a long time to reach their current level, and they had experienced many difficult things along the way. They did not want to risk becoming weak again. Chapter 29:15 Ancient Abyss Grandmaster. Why does it matter to you where I am going? Han Sun coldly asked. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster was not angry. He smiled and said, you misunderstand. I only asked you to find out whether or not our target is one and the same. So what if it is the same? Are you, Grandmaster, going to kill me first? Han Sun raised his eyebrows and coldly grunted. He was not mad. He just wanted to see if Ancient Abyss Grandmaster and his people were willing to talk more. If our purpose is the same, why don't we cooperate? We can avoid conflict and risk less. What do you think? Ancient Abyss Grandmaster looked like he never became mad. He always spoke quietly. Cooperate? How would you like to cooperate, Grandmaster? Han Sun was shocked, but this was perfect for him. He did not know anything. If he was able to get some information from Ancient Abyss Grandmaster and the others, it was not a bad thing to pursue. It depends on what your purpose is. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster smiled. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster is such an old fox. Han Sun knew it would be impossible to get information out of him. He looked at the direction he wanted to go and said, I do not know what Grandmaster's purpose is either. With things being that way, I believe we should just go our separate ways. After saying that, Han Sun turned around and started going in the direction he wanted to. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster did not stop him. He followed him, smiled, and said, if we are sharing the same road, we should at least go together. We can look after each other. If something bad happens to us, perhaps we can cooperate in those moments. I do not own this path. If you want to go, Grandmaster, that is up to you. Han Sun ignored Ancient Abyss and the others. He took Bao with him to fly away. Ancient Abyss and the 4 Extreme King deifieds followed. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster was a rare character. Even if the Extreme King and Han Sun were hostile, he was being surprisingly pleasant to Han Senator. It was not like Han Sun loved talking to him. It was just that Ancient Abyss Grandmaster was very intelligent and knew how to socialize with people. While he was talking to Han Sun, it was like he was talking to an old friend. It did not make him feel uncomfortable. The things he talked about, along with the way he spoke, made people very interested. When spoken by him, something that was very normal seemed very interesting. It propagated an allure and desire to hear more. On the road, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster introduced to him the things they encountered. Han Sun and Bauer found it very interesting. He could not avoid talking to him. The atmosphere was quite pleasant. It was like they were a bunch of friends going on a hike. The more Han Sun thought about it, the things Ancient Abyss Grandmaster discussed did not help him out at all. Han Sun really admired that. The more a person talked, the more at risk they were at leaking information they shouldn't. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster, however, despite flapping his gums for the longest amount of time, did not let a single thing slip. It made people feel very comfortable, and that he was not being pushy. That was not something normal people could do. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster is a very special character. Han Sun was now on higher alert. It was not scary to make enemies. It was scary when one had an enemy standing in front of them. But the enemy made them feel comfortable and at ease. Although he made it known he was the enemy, the hostile thoughts were less frequent. That was the scariest kind of enemy. The group of people flew for 10 days. Han Sun was given loads of universal knowledge from Ancient Abyss Grandmaster. He learned about the legends of sacred and many more myths. Han Sun suddenly saw an area that looked like a landfill. Many universal trash heaps were floating about. It was like an endless sea of trash. While overlooking the sea of trash, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster said, "This place is very close to the sacred core area back then. If we keep going this way, time and space will be all messed up. All kinds of energies and chaotic forces swell here. Plus, all the xenogenics here are top class. Even a true god elite would feel under pressure in a place like this. If you want to proceed, you should be very careful. Plus, you are taking a child along with you. You should be doubly careful. All this time we have yet to encounter a single xenogenic. I say this big barren system is not as scary as the legends claim." Han Sun only feigned his ignorance. With a serious look, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster reminded him, "Please do not be so reckless. The reason why we can travel here safely is that an elite has come here before us. He has cleared the dangers that were here. It will not be the same if we proceed. Even the true god-class elite could not clear out all the dangers ahead." "Oh really? Do you know who the elite ahead of us is, Grandmaster?" Han Sun asked. "I do not know." Ancient Abyss shook his head. "They have deliberately erased the traces of their coming. Although you can still follow a trail, you cannot identify whose it was. That is something to worry about. I hope you will be careful about all this, and not bring harm to that child." "Thank you for the reminder, Grandmaster. If it is that dangerous, I will not proceed. I think I will go elsewhere." Han Sun bowed to Ancient Abyss Grandmaster. "Grandmaster, thank you for taking care of us. We appreciate it. I guess we will part ways here. Let's hope we meet again." After that, Han Sun carried Bauer and traveled to another side of the trash sea. He understood that Ancient Abyss Grandmaster had not only told him all he had as a simple reminder to be careful. It was a sign of refusal. It was supposed to mean that the way forward was too dangerous, and they should not have trusted each other. It was not very nice if they were to go on together. Han Sun understood what he meant, so he chose to leave. After Han Sun was gone, an extreme king deified elite looked toward where Han Sun departed and asked, "Mr. Grandmaster, do you think Han Sun is here for that?" Ancient Abyss Grandmaster shook his head. "It is hard to say, but where he is going is possibly where we are headed to." Another deified elite quietly asked, "Do you think we should take him out first?" "Not yet," Ancient Abyss Grandmaster said. "If we do not do it now and reach that place, he has a weird geno art that can prove troublesome to us," a deified elite said. "That is fine. Although his geno arts are strange, I have a way to break them. Do not worry." After pausing, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster looked in the direction Han Sun left and squinted his eyes. "Maybe he will even be able to help us." Han Sun followed the outskirts of the trash sea for a while. He stopped when he was no longer able to see Ancient Abyss Grandmaster and the others. He looked around. The trash sea appeared endless. He had no idea how big it was. "Let's go in from here," Han Sun said to Bauer, who was perched on his shoulder. "Don't you run off." "Bauer has been good," Bauer said as she blinked her eyes. "I have not run off." Chapter 29:16 Trash Sea. Han Sun rubbed his cheeks and laughed. "Did you think I didn't know that when we were near the God Punishment Sword, you wanted to run off?" Bauer looked like she had been wronged and said, I thought you were interested in the big treasure sword. I was going to pull it out and give it to you. Can you pull it out? Han-sun looked at Bauer with shock. I think I can, Bauer said with a nod. Why did you not do it? Han-sun was curious as to how and why Bauer would resist. That was not her usual way. It was because there were baddies. The bad guys Bauer was referring to were Ancient Abyss Grandmaster, and the others with whom he traveled. You are very smart. Han-sun rubbed Bauer on the head and said, there is no rush. On the way back, we can pull out the big treasure sword. Now, Han-sun knew why Bauer was being so nice on the road. It was because of Ancient Abyss Grandmaster. They entered the sea of trash. Han-sun felt as if the radius of his Dongxian aura had been severely reduced. He found it much harder to sense things. The power of the sea of trash was messed up. Even Dongxian aura was difficult to cast. Dongxian aura was only able to scan up to 1 mile away. With the messed up energy present, it was too severely reduced. It is no wonder Ancient Abyss Grandmaster did not want to walk with me. In this place, no one wants to bring a ticking time bomb closer. Han-sun looked around and proceeded forward with care. There were broken pieces of metal, crystals, and materials strewn about everywhere. There were also big pieces of machines and broken buildings, as well as many small things. Han-sun did not know what most of the things were. After navigating around a broken giant stone pillar, Han-sun looked over the trash sea ahead of him. There was an energy ring that looked like a black hole. It was moving inside the trash sea. The black hole was bigger than the planet with the big treasure sword in it. As they passed by, the trash got sucked in. Although Han-sun was too far away from the energy vortex, he still felt the powerful suction. That's a very scary energy vortex. I am afraid if the true god elites were sucked up, they would be unable to escape it. Han-sun left the energy vortex. He did not dare get close to it. In this place, Han-sun wasn't about to use teleportation techniques. He was worried about entering some turbulent patch, or another place like it. Boom! 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 Han-sun went around the black hole. He saw flickering fireworks coming out of the trash sea in front. It was like a light substance flickering. It looked colorful and pretty. The area with the light substance shining was where trash was getting ripped apart. It was not forced. It was like a robot breaking itself down into smaller parts. What the hell is this thing? Han-sun frowned. He saw some flickering universal cogwheels, but he did not know what those universal cogwheels were. While Han-sun was wondering that, he saw a river of flowers on the other side of the trash sea. It was a real river of flowers. There were all kinds of flowers with different colors growing amid the garbage. They coated a significant portion of the trash, creating a river of flowers that was 30 feet wide. It was impossible to tell how long it was. The flower river seemed to go on forever. This was not a realm with 0 atmospheres, but it also was not somewhere where a normal plant could grow. Plus, there was white dust everywhere. It did not look normal for flowers to be growing there. Han-sun looked closer. He saw a big red goldfish with the head of a lion swimming in front of the flower river. Wherever it went, a red light shone. The trash around it had flowers growing in it. The scene looked miraculous and beautiful. True God-class xenogenic? Han-sun frowned. He noticed the presence the goldfish released. It was scary. It was sure to make the hearts of all jump. There was an 8 or 9 out of 10 chance that it was a true God-class xenogenic. The goldfish xenogenic swung its tail. Wherever it went, a path was cleared in the rubble. No matter whether or not it was metal or stone, flowers would grow in its wake. It was swimming toward Han Sr. Good timing. If I kill this true god xenogenic, my deified genes will have almost filled up. Han-sun drew his causal karma knife and readied himself to fight the goldfish. When the goldfish drew a little closer, Han-sun discovered that the goldfish was very strange. Its scales were red. It was unknown what kind of metal they were made from, but inside it was flesh. It had the elemental powers of plants. It was really hard to tell what kind of xenogenic it was. As the goldfish got closer, Han-sun thought, the big barren systems are really weird. Why do the xenogenics here have so many elements? Flowers were growing on top of the trash. The pale, white trash sea looked a whole lot livelier. Han-sun was ready to swing his knife and combat it, but the goldfish opened its mouth and spat out some bubbles. The bubbles were 30 feet long. They gently floated toward Han. Senator Han Sen's causal karma knife had purple air. He used Fang to slash the bubbles. The bubbles were very thin. It was like one touch could break them. When Han Sen slashed the bubbles, the knife air went inside. It seemed to be affected by some kind of power that spun around inside the bubbles. It was like he had fallen into a vortex. Does it have a water element power? Han Sen was shocked. He could not determine what the goldfish's element was. Seeing the bubbles float his way, Han Sen dodged them and lashed out at the goldfish. Before his knife air could get close to the goldfish spat out more bubbles. There were so many that they covered the entire area. Han Sen dodged twice. He noticed that the places where he had moved had been taken over by the bubbles. He was not able to dodge, so he pulled out the shield of the Medusa's gaze to shield his body. He also used Medusa's gaze. The weird woman on the face of the shield slowly opened her eyes. Some strange light came out from her eyes. When the weird light touched the bubbles, it was reflected. The light of Medusa's gaze kept being reflected in the bubbles. It created even more light. Han Sen almost had it on him, so it made him hurriedly dodge. Pop! The places around were taken over by the bubbles. Han Sen had only just moved a bit when he touched a bubble. The shield of the Medusa's gaze touched the bubble and went inside it. Han Sen and Bauer fell into the bubble too. Han Sen did not dare use the Medusa's gaze. If he used it inside the bubble, the reflection would have obliterated him and Bauer. Han Sen gathered up power. He clutched his shield with the hope to rush out of the bubble. He was only able to get close to the wall before he felt a spinning power make him and the shield slide away. It was like he was surfing. He kept sliding inside the bubble. Once Han Sen flashed away from the wall of water, it stopped. He frowned and said, "This Xenogeneic's power is so weird. It can deflect the power of the shield of the Medusa's gaze." Pang! 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 While Han Sen was thinking, the bubbles around broke open. Only the bubble left inside with them was still whole. The goldfish went in front of the bubble. Its eyes, which looked huge, were going to touch the bubble. Each eye was taller than Han. Senator the fish stared at Han Sen and Bauer inside the bubble. 2917 Tester 304 Han Sen watched as the big goldfish outside the bubble stared at them. He gathered up the Xian Yellow Sutra's power in his hand. He wanted to attack the fiend and see if he could downgrade its level. Before Han Sen struck, the big goldfish opened its mouth. There was a sudden pop sound. Han Sen, Bauer, and the bubble were sucked inside the big goldfish. After the big goldfish sucked the bubble in, its butterfly-like big tail swung. It traveled through space and swam around. Han Sen and Bauer were inside the bubble that had been sucked into the belly of the big goldfish. Outside the bubble, everything was completely red. It was very bright. It was like they were inside a red mist. Beyond the red mist, Han Sen slightly saw copper-looking metal walls. The weirdest part was that the metal wall had strange symbols and text on it. It was obviously a man-made construct. Han Sen noticed that the bubble was not breaking, and the powers of the zone were not corroding their bodies. He was attracted by the text and symbols displayed on the metal wall. He was not in a rush to attack just yet. Are the Xenogeneics inside the Big Baron systems all man-made? It is probably hard to make a true God-class Xenogeneic. Even a God spirit cannot do it. Was Sacred really that strong before? Han Sen was checking out the text and symbols on the metal walls. Han Sen did not know what the symbols meant. The scribe was in the universe's common language, so he could understand it perfectly fine. Tester number 304, Han Sen read it aloud. It was obviously a number. That was all he could see. Han Sen understood the words, but they meant nothing to him. The way the words were written did surprise him. He recognized the words. Back then, in the Tianxia system, Han Sen had entered Purple Fight's vision before jumping into the eyesight of another woman. It was the woman who was trapped in Two Worlds Mountain. Her handwriting was the same as the handwriting on that metal wall. It seems like I am correct. This goldfish must be a test subject of Sacred. The woman was a researcher for Sacred Leader. The goldfish must be one of her test subjects. Han Sen remembered that inside the black hole spider's belly, he had encountered the white tiger. It made people grow mushrooms on their heads. Although he knew more about the origin of the goldfish, it was useless information for Han Sen and Bauer. He did not know where the woman went. He wanted to find her and ask a bunch of questions, but he hadn't seen hide nor hair of her again. Han-sun wanted to break the bubble and rush out, but he noticed that the goldfish's direction was actually the direction he wanted to go. His heart jumped. He lessened the tightness of his fist. This fish is going in the direction I want to go to. Since we are in its belly, there is no danger. Let's take this for a ride. Perhaps it can save us a lot of trouble. After thinking about this, Han-sun did not move. Bauer jumped down from Han-sun's shoulders. She stepped onto the bubble's wall. She surfed around on the inside and was having a lot of fun. Han-sun thought it was weird. The goldfish had swallowed them, but it had not broken the bubble. With the bubble there, the power of the red mist was not hurting Han-sun or Bauer. It was hard to tell what the goldfish wanted. Does this mean the goldfish recognizes the relationship between me and Sacred Leader? Is that why it hasn't planned on killing us? Does it want to take us somewhere? After Han-sun thought of that, he had no qualm with staying still. He did not want to kill the fish. Because they were inside the goldfish, the Dongxian aura was blocked by the goldfish's body and its own power. Han-sun had a guess as to where the goldfish was headed, but he could not feel or see anything regarding where they were. All he could do was wait where he was. Did that woman go back to the Big Baron systems? Did she discover that I have come here? Is that why she commanded this big goldfish to come and collect me? Is it supposed to deliver me to her? Han-sun had nothing to do, so his mind kept thinking about what the goldfish's ultimate goal was. It had been a few days, yet the goldfish had yet to stop. Han-sun did not know where the goldfish was going, but there was one thing that was for sure. The goldfish did not want to kill them. At least, it didn't want to yet. If it harbored ill desires against Han-sun, it would not have kept the bubble active. The goldfish traveled for around 7 or 8 days. Bauer thought it was getting to be a bit too boring. She could not be bothered by playing surfing games any longer. She pulled out a chessboard and played chess with Han Senator. It was unknown how many matches the two had, but they eventually realized the goldfish had stopped moving. The bubble with Han-sun and Bauer inside suddenly flew out. Not long later, the goldfish spat out the bubble. Han-sun looked around. He noticed he was still in the sea of trash. Atop the trash, there was a countless number of flowers. It was like a lovely garden in space. There was a domed building full of fresh flowers. There was water inside it. The water came out from the building's gaps. The waterfalls were like descending silver dragons. They looked absolutely gorgeous. Inside the building, the water was like a lake. A smaller goldfish was parked at the water's edge. Its mouth was facing the sky. Its eyes were wide open. Its tail kept swinging, making waves in the water. The bubble Han-sun and Bauer were headed for the little goldfish's mouth. It moved very swiftly. Han-sun was now able to understand what was going on. With a wry smile he said, "It looks like I thought too much. The reason the goldfish did not want to kill us is that he was saving us to feed its child. This goldfish is quite professional. He knows its child likes to eat fresh food." Seeing the bubble move closer to the mouth of the little goldfish, Han-sun generated power. He was going to break the bubble. Great! I can get them all at once. Han-sun stared at the little goldfish. He did not strike yet. He wanted to draw some distance between him and the little goldfish. He wanted to take the little goldfish as a hostage. The big goldfish would certainly be afraid. Although it was a small goldfish, its head was as big as a killer whale. It would be easy for it to eat Han-sun and Bauer. Upon seeing the face of the little goldfish, one could tell it was quite different from the big goldfish. The big goldfish's scales were made of metal, and there was flesh below the scales. This little goldfish was made of metal too. From top to bottom and in and out, there was no flesh. It looked like a metallic fish statue. It looked weird. Seeing the bubble land before the little goldfish, Han-sun did not hesitate. He generated jadeskin power and threw a punch at the bubble's wall. That punch was not enough to break the bubble's water power, but the ice power froze the bubble. It was now solid. Han-sun summoned his cold light sword. He slashed at the temporarily frozen bubble. The pink sword light shattered the ice and water bubble. Without any hesitation, the sword followed the person. The man and the sword were one. Han-sun was thrusting toward the little goldfish, which was eagerly awaiting its meal with its mouth wide open. Chapter 29:18. A fish hostage. Han Sun was too close to the small goldfish, so the big goldfish was unable to react. Han Sun turned, so that his body was on the back of the small goldfish. He attacked the spine behind the goldfish's head with his cold light sword. That small goldfish was not as strong as the big goldfish. Still, it was born deified, so it was not weak. Han Sun used all of his power, and the power of the cold light sword to thrust the blade deep into the small goldfish's back. The little goldfish immediately felt pain, but it kept moving. Its mouth spewed out numerous bubbles. Its wounds were like lava fissures that bled. Han Sun clutched the sword tightly and did not let go. He rode on the back of the little goldfish. No matter how much it struggled, he did not let go. Upon witnessing this scene, the big goldfish was angry. All of its metal scales straightened and turned into 10,000 gold-scaled god lights. It was like there was a sky full of knife lights, heading for Han's senator. They were going to slice and dice him into little pieces. Han Sun was not worried, nor was he in a rush. He held onto the cold light sword's handle. He pulled it hard, which significantly hurt the little goldfish. The fish writhed around uncontrollably. The sword was still inside it, and its belly was now facing up. The 10,000 gold-scaled god lights that were heading for Han Sun suddenly went toward the belly of the small goldfish. The big goldfish was stunned and pulled its gold scales back. It stopped the gold-scaled god lights. They were only a few feet away from demolishing the small goldfish. Han Sun's hand holding the cold light sword started moving. The weapon had hurt the small goldfish, and it continued doing so. The small goldfish kept writhing around in the water with its mouth releasing countless bubbles. The big goldfish was furious as it watched, but it was unable to do anything. If it wanted to attack, Han Sun would have likely used the small goldfish like a shield. The big goldfish did not want that to happen. "You stupid fish. Don't you want to turn me into food? Come on." Han Sun kept waving the cold light sword. He was pointing at the big goldfish, trying to make it even angrier. The wounds on the small goldfish were bleeding, but the blood was strange. When the red blood came out and touched the water, it turned into a copper-like metal. Han Sun was deliberately trying to make the big goldfish mad. No matter what creature it was, even if it were a true god class, it would start showing its flaws when angered. Even if its power were unleashed at a more frightening and powerful level, its flaws would be exposed. Despite being stronger, no longer being careful meant it would be easier to kill. The method used was a bit cheap, but the rules of the big universe made it a dog-eat-dog world. It was survival of the fittest at all times. If Han Sun were not strong enough, he and Bauer would become food for the little goldfish. When it came to survival, it did not matter what method was used to deal with enemies. Although the big goldfish was being driven mad by Han Sun, it did not rush forward. It opened its eyes wide and straightened its scales. It simply stared at Han's senator. Pop, 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 pop. The big goldfish kept firing out a stream of bubbles. The bubbles were different compared to before. These bubbles did not fly toward Han's senator instead. They just kept exploding around him. When those bubbles exploded, they created some high and low-toned sounds. Han Sun shockingly discovered that the bubble sounds were not just an explosion but a language. The big goldfish seemed as if it wanted to say something. While Han Sun understood it a bit, he did not understand it completely. He did not understand what the big goldfish was trying to communicate. Han Sun used his Dongxian Sutra to look into the big goldfish's mind. Although the big goldfish's mind was very powerful, Han Sun could still understand what it was thinking. "Let my child go. I am willing to give you treasure in exchange for the life of my child." Han Sun knew that was what the big goldfish was telling him. Han Sun's heart jumped. He looked at the big goldfish and asked, "What treasure?" He wasn't sure if it would understand. After all, every creature had its own language. The common tongue of the universe was used by most creatures, but not every creature could speak it. Han Sun did not expect the goldfish to understand, but it spat out more bubbles. The volume of its thoughts was even stronger. Very big treasure. Han Sun sensed that was what the big goldfish said, but he still wasn't exactly sure if that was what it meant. "What is that thing?" Han Sun asked. The thoughts of the big goldfish were too fast. There was too much it wanted to express. Han Sen's Dongxian Sutra could not just entirely read its mind. After half the day, he had yet to figure out what sort of treasure the big goldfish was talking about. Han Sen stopped moving the cold light sword, and the little goldfish eventually felt better. It stopped feeling pain and was able to roll around. It was then that the big goldfish started to calm down. Even so, Han Sen had yet to figure out what it was trying to say. It was only able to communicate some strong ideas, specifically that it was willing to give up the treasure to save the child's life. Han Sen still had no idea what sort of treasure it was. Bauer tried to understand. She told Han Sen. He said the treasure is very, very powerful. Having that treasure would make you fearless. You can hear what it is saying? Han Sen was happy. I can understand a little, Bauer said with a nod. Excellent. Can you help me ask it what use the treasure is, and where it can be found? Han Sen asked. The big goldfish was able to understand what it was saying. It did not need Bauer to translate. After Han Sen said his piece, the goldfish heard him and spat out more bubbles in response. He said the treasure could save your life and is very powerful. With that treasure, you can travel here freely. Bauer paused and observed the bubbles again. She then said, he said the treasure is someplace far away, but he will instruct you on how to obtain the treasure. You go get me the treasure, and I will spare your child's life, Han Sen said to the big goldfish. The big goldfish sounded as if it was in a rush. It spat out a lot of bubbles. It went on like that for a while. It was like it was trying to explain something. Bauer watched it for a while. When the bubbles completely broke, she said, it said it could not take the treasure. It has to be us. Han Sen looked at the big goldfish and asked, are you trying to trick us? If there is no danger, why can you not go and get it? The big goldfish spat out a whole lot more bubbles. Bauer translated and said, he says the thing has a scary guy guarding it. If he goes, the scary thing will spot it from afar. He can't get close. Otherwise everyone dies. If we go, he has a way for the monster to be unable to find us. That way, we can find the treasure. Really? Han Sen looked at the big goldfish. He was very suspicious about it. He then thought, with the big goldfish's brain and intelligence, it was unlikely it knew how to lie. Dad, I think this fish can be trusted. See how poor they are. Let the small goldfish go. Bauer begged him. Fine. If you can honestly tell me where to get the treasure, I will spare the life of your child, Han Sen said while coldly looking at the big goldfish. The small goldfish was only larva class. It was not useful for Han Sen anyway. He also did not think he had what it took to defeat the big goldfish. It was good enough to get some treasure out of the situation. 2919 Floating the big goldfish was not able to explain what the treasure was like, because there was no name for it. Bauer was also unable to guess what it was trying to describe. The way the big goldfish talked about how to get the treasure also seemed strange. Han Sen wondered if the big goldfish was trying to trick them. After considering the big goldfish's intelligence, the chance that it could make up a complicated story to fool someone was minimal. In the end, Han Sen decided to go and do what the big goldfish said. Han Sen did not let go of the small goldfish. He still took the small goldfish as a hostage and made the big goldfish lead the way. In that endless sea of trash, Han Sen and Bauer were hidden in an old space cabinet. They had been looking around their environment. Han Sen regretted believing the big goldfish. It said he would only have to hide amidst the trash and follow the current of the sea of trash to reach the treasure's location. Han Sen and Bauer had not been in the broken space cabinet for long when they saw the sky flash with some purple light substances. They reduced the size of the trash. Han Sen watched all the purple light substances flicker as they decomposed metal, stone, and plastic. He was afraid he and Bauer would end up decomposed with the cabinet. I hope the big goldfish did not lie to me. Otherwise, I will go back and cook his entire family. I will put in some extra chili when I cook them. After Han Sen pulled the string of the bow, there was no turning back. Although he was furious, he had no choice but to trust that big goldfish. He was holding a fire-looking red scale that the big goldfish had given it to him. He was told to hold it to go through the magnetic stream safely. There were more purple light substances. They were like a bunch of fireflies flickering in the sky. They made their way onto other substances. When those had enough purple light substances on them, they decomposed and fell apart. The broken cabinet had quite a lot of purple light substances on it. Han-sun hesitated and wondered if he should use some form of defense. The big goldfish had said that he should not make use of powers and reveal himself. Otherwise, the xenogeniac that guarded the treasure would find him. If that happened, he would have no chance of obtaining the treasure. If the big goldfish was lying to Han-sun, and he did not use defensive powers now, only God knew what would happen if the purple light substance touched them. While Han-sun hesitated, a red light formed on the red scales in his hands. The red light was in the space cabinet, creating a layer of red. Perhaps it was because of the red layer's protection, but the space cabinet did not decompose like the other space trash, even though the space cabinet was filled with purple light substances. Seeing the big goldfish scale working, Han-sun felt much safer. The father and daughter hid in the space cabinet. While the magnetic light stream kept floating, they saw more space trash being decomposed. There was a small mountain-looking stone palace under the purple light substances. It broke and created numerous big rocks. When the big rocks had a huge amount of purple light substances on them, they became even smaller rocks. The process happened again and again. Everything was becoming decomposed. Finally, the small mountain-looking stone palace decomposed into the big barren system's white dust that was everywhere. This process only lasted 4 or 5 days, yet a big palace had been reduced to dust. In the time they were floating, Han-sun and Bauer had seen too much of this scene. Han-sun felt numb to it. Fortunately, the scale kept releasing its weak red light. It protected the space cabinet and stopped the space cabinet from being decomposed. In the beginning, there were not many purple light substances. Now the purple light substances had created a sea of purple light. Aside from purple, there was nothing else. In the space cabinet, a purple light kept rolling by. Fortunately, Han-sun's Dongxian aura was very good at space and universe location. Otherwise, they would not have known which direction they were headed. Bauer looked out the window of the space cabinet and asked with shock, "What is that? Have we arrived?" Han-sun moved closer to the window. He saw the purple light stream was like an ocean. It was not where the big goldfish had told them to go. According to the big goldfish, when the purple light stream disappeared, then they would have arrived. It was still purple outside. Han-sun was not able to see more than 9 feet away. This could not have been the place yet. In the purple light stream, Han-sun saw a blurry shadow. It was like some purple light was going up and down. The thing was a bit far away. Although Han-sun was barely able to see it, he was shocked. The father and daughter had been floating for almost 15 days. Everything they had seen was decomposed by the purple light stream. During the past few days, the purple light stream had become extremely thick. There was no more trash. Aside from the space cabinet, everything that entered the purple light stream had decomposed into the white dust. Now that thing outside was like the space cabinet and had not been decomposed. It was going up and down in the purple light stream. It followed Han-sun in the purple light stream. "What is that thing?" Han-sun and Bauer were in front of the window. They kept watching the thing outside. They wished it was closer to the space cabinet, so that they could see what it was. It seemed as if their prayers reached the god spirits. For a while the purple light stream waved. The thing was getting closer to Han Sr. Closer. Closer. "I can almost see it now." Han-sun was excited. After all, they had been inside the space cabinet for many days and were bored. They needed something interesting to do. Bauer was also excited. She looked at the window and asked, "Dad, do you think that is a truck that sells ice cream?" "Selling ice cream in this place. You are quite imaginative." Han-sun wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. He knew Bauer had been trapped there for many days and had not eaten much food. She wanted to eat good food. Suddenly, that thing was nearly right in front of them. It was only 6 feet away. Han-sun inspected the part that was closest to them. "Holy shit. It is a dead body." Han-sun clearly saw the body. It looked like a man who was sitting cross-legged. His clothes were still whole, but his face and hands were skeletal. There was no flesh. In that very bright purple light stream, the skeleton looked like jade. Its eyes were purple. The scene was quite bizarre. His body and bones did not get decomposed. It does not look normal. Han's son was used to dead people, so he was not afraid. He was more focused on the dead body's clothes. 2920 Sunglasses. There were many races in the universe, and there were many different kinds of clothes. They mostly saw protective clothing and armor. That was especially true of the Big Baron system. To venture there, they wore xenogenic armor or self-geno armor. The skeleton's clothing was a little bit different. It looked more like ordinary cloth or silk, and the style did not look protective. It was more like a simple fashion style. The clothes were loose like a robe and mostly blue. The sides of the clothing had black flowers for decoration. They looked loose yet somber. The purple light substances kept jumping across the clothing. It made the clothes shine brightly. The clothing was not decomposing, and the skeleton was not breaking. Hansen thought. To be able to be unharmed by the purple light stream, those clothes and the skeleton must be special. It is a shame I cannot use power. If I could, I would probably take the clothes for myself. Perhaps it is a high-level treasure. The skeleton was close to them, bobbing up and down. It was within the purple light stream, and kept moving through the purple light substances. It almost hit the space cabinet a couple of times. Hansen was tempted to bring it inside. The space cabinet was only big enough to fit one person inside. It was quite tight for him and Bauer to be in there. There was no room for the skeleton to squeeze inside too. Plus, the big goldfish said they had to hide and not show themselves. Otherwise, it would have all been for nothing. Hansen kept thinking about it, but he eventually gave up on the idea. The space cabinet kept moving with the purple light stream. Hansen had no idea they were anymore. The skeleton was still wrapped up by the purple light stream. It occasionally drifted away from the space cabinet, but never went too far. After a few more days, the red light on the scale started to become weaker. It seemed as if its energy was running out. The red light in the space cabinet had also dimmed. One was able to hear the space cabinet make some "tsitsia" noises. It sounded as if it was going to fall apart. This scale is not going to last. What if the big goldfish was wrong? Hansen looked outside. The purple light was still flickering. Pang! Both Hansen and Bauer shook. It felt like the space cabinet hit something, and was rolling like a ball. When the space cabinet stopped, Hansen and Bauer noticed there was no more purple light trying to assault them. Hansen looked outside the window. He did not see any more purple light. It was actually snow white outside. It was different from the white dust. The snow there was not dust. It was actually snow. Hansen saw a land of ice and snow. We are here. Hansen was happy. He suddenly heard a catch sound. The space cabinet could not stay together any longer. It shattered and broke into pieces all over the snow. Hansen and Bauer were exposed to the snow. The fish scale Hansen held shattered like a crumbling rock. It was all over the floor. This place is just as the big goldfish said. They had been inside the space cabinet for many days. Bauer was happy to be freed from the cramped space. Pang! The two of them looked around the snowy field of ice. They wanted to locate the place the goldfish had talked to them about. Something suddenly fell from the sky and landed right next to them. Hansen and Bauer turned their heads. It was the skeleton. It had dropped right into the snow near them. Dad, it is that skeleton. Bauer ran over to the skeleton and squatted down next to it. She used her finger to poke the skeleton's brain. The skeleton's brain suddenly turned. There was no more movement. Hansen walked over and smiled. His clothes must be good stuff. There is no point in him holding on to them. He should do something nice and give them to us. We can bury him in exchange. We all benefit that way. After Hansen said that, he started prodding the skeleton. He wanted to see if, aside from the clothes, there was another treasure inside the pockets. He did not find any treasures. Inside one of the pockets he saw something. He could not tell what it was. He put his hand inside and pulled the thing out. It is a pair of glasses. These cannot be the same glasses the crystallizers had. Hansen was looking at the glasses. The glasses kind of looked like Toad sunglasses, but the lenses were black. They were not transparent. They were as solid as ink. Hansen put the glasses on. The moment he did that, the glasses displayed a weird sort of power. The power only spread onto Hansen and did not go anywhere else. Oh, Dad. Why did you turn into a big ape? Bauer's eyes were open wide as she looked at Han's Senator. The sunglasses were not transparent, but Han's son could see everything. He looked at himself and realized he had been turned into a big ape. He was shocked. He took off the sunglasses, and his body returned to normal. This is a god personality armament. Han's son looked at the sunglasses in his hands. His heart jumped. The sunglasses vanished. They appeared in the Sea of Soul. This was different from the Sky Vine Radish God Lance. After killing the god spirit, that god personality armament should have been one used to make the other god personality armament. It was just like the Sky Armor Scabbard. It was not a god personality armament one collected right away. Dad, let me try it. I want to be a big ape. Bauer approached Han's son with a look of excitement. Han's son gave Bauer the sunglasses. She put them on, and her body changed. Her face changed, but she did not become a big ape. She became a bee that was the size of a fist. She flapped her wings and buzzed in Hansen's ears. Dad, I became a little bee, Bauer said while happily flying. These glasses can change people's bodies. That is fairly amazing, Hansen thought. Bauer, who was a little bee, landed on the floor. She then turned into a white rabbit. Dad, I became a white rabbit. Bauer was very excited. She kept jumping. She suddenly turned into a pigeon in the air. In a short amount of time, Bauer was able to turn into many different things. Han's son was frozen. He said, "Holy crap. This thing is like the Monkey King that can change 72 times. After watching her for a while, Han's son got bored. He squatted down and tried to take off the skeleton's robes. The robes had been able to survive the purple light stream, so they had to be made with some good stuff. This cannot be another god personality armament, can it? Han's son took off the robe. He did not put it on yet. He looked at the skeleton and started digging a hole in the ice. He put the skeleton inside. He closed his hands and said, "I put you in the soil. No, I put you in the ice so that you do not have to be exposed. Thanks for the items you have given us. But now we no longer know each other." 2921 Statue on the mountain path. After burying the skeleton, Han's son put on the robe-like clothing. He was not afraid of dead people's things. Plus, the clothes did not look dirty. They actually looked rather new. Things such as bacteria had been decomposed by the purple light substances, so nothing dirty was left. When Han's son put the clothes on, he tried using power to activate the clothing's power. He thought if it was not a god personality armament, it had to at least be a treasure. No matter how much Han's son tried to activate it, the blue and black robe did not move. It was like something normal without any energy. This thing cannot be a treasure. It did not get decomposed in the purple light stream, so it is at least deified. Why does it not have any reaction? Han's son thought it was strange, but there was nothing he could do if the clothes did not do anything. He tried to tear the clothing up, but they were too tough. Even with Hansen's power, he was unable to shred the clothing. Hansen thought, "Never mind. I will wear them like armor. With this robe, power like wind, fire, thunder, and lightning cannot come to me." Han's son looked around. He saw 3 black stone mountains far away across the ice fields. Those 3 stone mountains looked very unique. They were different from the ice mountains and snow mountains. The ice mountain was like a blade, and the snow mountain was like a ring-shaped volcano. Only the black stone mountain looked like the petals of a lotus flower. The 3 mountains looked like the Chinese character for pin. This should be the place. Han's son picked up Bauer. He stepped on the snow and walked toward the 3 black stone mountains. According to the big goldfish, after arriving, they had to walk across the snow. They were not able to fly or teleport. Otherwise, they would not get their treasure and likely be attacked by scary xenogeniacs. The big goldfish was a top-class xenogeniac. If it was afraid of these xenogeniacs, so they had to be extraordinarily powerful. Han's son did not want to risk it. This place is very bright. If we fly, we will be seen. But won't we also be seen while we walk? Han's son felt rather suspicious about all of it. Since they were already there, no matter whether it was true or false, he had to give it a shot. On the road, it was just like the big goldfish said. It was just ice and snow around. There were no creatures. There were no xenogeniacs either. Everything around just seemed dead. The father and daughter did not face any danger. They only wasted some time by walking to the 3 black stone mountains. At the foothills, they looked up at the 3 mountains. They were very big and pretty. The 3 stone mountains were each about 30,000 feet tall. They were all lined up together. In the center of the hills they were on, the 3 mountains spread out. It was like a lotus flower that had just opened. Following the mountain crags, they went the 7 or 8 miles the big goldfish had told them to travel. They stopped at stone stairs, which would take them up the mountain. They followed the mountain wall. It was like one long staircase ascending to heaven. After they arrived, Han Sun did not go up straight away. He looked at the stone staircase. His heart was racing. According to what the big goldfish said, he and Bauer had to face away from the stairs and close their eyes. To go up, they had to blindly feel their way up. They could not use any powers either. They could not even use powers like area casts or anything of the sort. The big goldfish also reminded them that while they walked up the stone staircase, no matter what noise they heard behind them, they could not look away and open their eyes. They had to keep going no matter what. When their hands felt as if they were running across a stone carving, they could keep feeling their way forward until they found the treasure. After they found the treasure, they still couldn't open their eyes. They had to keep their eyes shut and go back the way they came. If they descended the mountain, they still would have only succeeded halfway. With that goldfish's intelligence, I do not think it could compose such a complicated plan to trick us. Han Sun froze. He picked up Bauer, put her in his arms and smiled. The big goldfish told you what I heard too. When we are on the mountain, we cannot open our eyes. If you really cannot help but open your eyes, you must tell me. Bauer was in Han Sun's arms. She closed her eyes and excitedly said, Dad, I am ready. Let's go up the mountain. Han Sun closed his eyes. He used one hand to touch the wall and went up the stone staircase backward. He could not use his Dongxian aura as an aid or use his eyes. He had to use his ears, so he focused on listening. Aside from the wind, he did not hear anything strange. The stone staircase was not difficult to ascend. With the power Han Sun's body had, he could shut his eyes and easily walk backward. It was like an ordinary thing. He was still afraid there might be some trick on the road. He did not go fast. He kept walking and listening. Han Sun kept on walking, but he did not hear anything weird. It was quiet the entire time. Suddenly, Han Sun's fingers felt the stone wall was a bit different. The very smooth stone wall had some cracks in it. Han Sun moved his fingers. He noticed the markings were deep, light, straight, and curly. He could not tell what the carvings were about. If he used his Dongxian aura, he would not even have to use his eyes to look at what they were. Right now he was only able to guess. Han Sun touched the markings and kept on going. His fingers kept touching the stone. Because he could not touch more of it, he was unable to tell what it was. While he was walking, Han Sun suddenly heard something strange from behind. It sounded like a snake hissing. It was very quiet, but it made one's head itch and body flare up with goosebumps. The sound was getting closer to Han's senator. It felt like a toxic snake was approaching him from behind. Very quickly, it was almost on his back. What the fuck? Han Sun could not do it anymore. If he had to compare himself to the big goldfish, he trusted himself more. He would rather face the danger and fight for the treasure than put his life at risk by believing the big goldfish. Han Sun used his Dongxian aura. He opened his eyes and looked up the stairs. He was shocked. There was no toxic snake behind him. The path was completely the same. It was still leading up the mountain. There was nothing on the stone stairs. There were lots of carvings on the wall, which led up and up. One could not see how long they went. Han Sun was unable to understand the things carved on the wall. That was because Han Sun only saw a part of it. Seeing the one part he was ascending, he guessed it might have been a large snake. Han Sun saw part of a snake statue. Han Sun looked at the carving and snake body that was moving. Although it had just been stone, it came alive. The black scales smelled like blood. Han Sun looked over at it. The stone statue turned into living flesh. The black scales were moving. A scary presence was all over the place. That goldfish didn't lie. I should not have opened my eyes. Although Han Sun knew the goldfish had not lied to him, he did not regret it. Han Sun needed to control his own fate. He could not expect to keep meeting good people all the time. Chapter 29-22 Fighting the Dragon. The mountain shook. Rocks were falling. Suddenly, the whole ground was tremoring. The stone wall statue had come to life. It was a giant snake. One was even able to see its tail. Based on what Hansen saw, the black-scale big snake's body was at least 36 feet high. It was like a wall that was impossible to truly measure. Feeling the black scales possess a scary presence, Hansen knew that the black-scaled snake was bigger than the big goldfish. Since he had already made this happen, he could not do anything to reverse the events. He flew up to the sky and looked at the 3 black stone mountains from space. He saw a large xenogeniac coiled around the 3 lotus-like mountains. Its body had black scales and it was dark in color. Its head was around the 3 lotus mountains. When the xenogeniac raised its head, Hansen discovered that it was not actually a black-scaled big snake. It was a real black dragon. The dragon head, horn, and beard all rose as the dragon moaned. Its voice pierced through the universe and space. It made the snow mountain and ice mountain collapse. The ice fields broke. Hansen was hanging in space. He used all of his power with the Dongxian aura to suppress the dragon's cry. His body was shaken. He felt as if he would fall apart any second. That's a very powerful xenogeniac. Hansen grabbed the shield of the Medusa's gaze and blocked the dragon's sprinting cry. He activated the image on the face of the shield of the Medusa's gaze. The pretty ladies, I had some weird, cold light. It landed on the black-scaled dragon. Hansen wanted to strike first. He wanted the black-scaled dragon to freeze on the stone mountain. The dragon's eyes were like bottomless black holes. It looked into the weird eyes of the Medusa. It looked like 2 black holes were creating a vortex that sucked the Medusa's eyes into them. The body of the creature did not get frozen. Hansen wanted to start the Medusa's gaze again, because the black-scaled dragon's eyes could absorb the staring light. Other bodies would not have been able to block the light. Before Hansen activated the Medusa's gaze, the black-scaled dragon's head raised. Its body kicked up a black cloud of smoke. The dragon's mouth opened and spat something out. Hansen had the traditional culture's effect. He thought the black dragon would be spitting out some dragon ball to play with him, but the dragon's mouth did not spit out a dragon ball. It was a lantern. It was a black stone lantern. Based on its appearance, it looked like a Geno Hall race lantern. But the lantern did not have a race mark. The lantern was burning with a fire that possessed a holy white color. The white flame was glowing brightly. It made the old stone lantern more mysterious and serious. Hansen instantly reacted. When the big goldfish described the treasure, it mentioned something about stone and fire. Hansen had no idea what that meant. Now that he saw the stone lantern, he realized what it was. The treasure the big goldfish spoke about was this lantern, but the stone lantern is inside the dragon's mouth. Even if I closed my eyes and walked there, how was I supposed to retrieve the lantern from the dragon's mouth? Hansen did not understand, but things were already in motion. He could not waste time thinking about things like that. To freely collect the stone lantern, he needed to kill this xenogeniac. Afterward, he would get the black-scaled dragon's xenogeniac genes. That was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Hansen thought about that before doing anything. The stone lantern flew out of the dragon's mouth. The black-scaled dragon reached a claw out. It put the stone lantern in front of its dragon mouth and blew fire into it. As the black dragon presence went through the flame, it turned white. It was like a tide going for Hansen. The dragon presence covered the entire area. Unless Hansen risked teleporting to unknown space, he could not evade that scary dragon presence. Hansen gathered up all his power. He held Bauer and placed her behind the shield of the Medusa's gaze. He used the shield to block the dragon presence that came with the lantern fire. Pang! Hansen felt a scary power strike his shield. His arm almost broke. The shield hit his body, which sent him flying. He flew through space for what seemed like forever. As the dragon presence messed with his senses, he kept his body tight to stabilize himself. Hansen felt as if his body had been shattered, but he still had the shield in his hands. He was shocked. The surface of the shield was burning with a holy white flame. It was just like the flame on the stone lantern. The white flame had no heat, so it did not burn the shield of the Medusa's gaze. The white flame was quickly spreading across the shield. It seemed as if it was going to be devoured in no time at all. Han Sen used his Dongxian powers. He tried to put out the fire on the shield, but he could not stop it. He watched the shield become surrounded by a white flame. He did not want it to spread onto his hands, so he had to let the shield go. As Han Sen let go of the shield of the Medusa's gaze, the shield was surrounded by white flame. The purple, metal-looking shield looked like it was surrounded by a holy white flame. It actually looked holy. The black-scaled big dragon's talons suddenly moved. Han still did not have complete control of the shield of the Medusa's gaze. It was flying toward the black-scaled dragon. Once it got closer, the dragon grabbed it with its talons. Han Sen saw that the big dragon's eyes were full of disdain. With the talons wrapped around the shield of the Medusa's gaze, the weird woman on the front opened her eyes. She fired out a weird light. How is that possible? Han Sen's face suddenly changed. The shield of the Medusa's gaze was not normally something a stranger could take and use, but the black-scaled dragon was somehow able to do so. That was a bit difficult to believe. The shield of the Medusa's gaze could only be used by the Gana's special element power. Han Sen used the Dongxian Sutra to simulate Gana powers. That was how he was able to make use of the shield of the Medusa's gaze. The black-scaled snake dragon had a different element from the Gana. Han Sen was certain about that. So, how was it able to activate the shield? Time did not grant Han Sen the chance to think about it too much. Seeing the Medusa's gaze light about to land on him, he flashed away. He teleported out to dodge the light emitted by the shield. Han Sen understood the Medusa's gaze quite well. The black-scaled dragon kept on firing Medusa's gaze like bullets. All of those kept being launched, but not a single one was able to harm Han Senator now. Han Sen's teleport skill could have him teleport away in the galaxy. The Medusa's gaze light could not keep up with his teleportation speed. The black-scaled dragon continuously attacked and repeatedly failed. It seemed to lose patience. It opened its mouth wide and spat out some dragon presence. This time, the dragon presence did not go through the stone lantern's flame. It was like a black cloud covering the sky and ground. It did not allow Han Sen to move. Han Sen looked at it. There were waving watermarks on his body. The dragon's presence covered the sky and earth. It looked extremely murderous, but it could not get close to Han Sen's body. His time ghost beast soul delayed time in the area. It made the dragon presence unable to reach Han Sr. Chapter 29-23 Stone Lantern. Without true God elite powers, it would have been very difficult to survive. Luckily, he had a skill like Under the Sky Knife. The black-scaled dragon's power was mighty, but it was not so strong that it didn't show any weaknesses. It did not perform perfectly. Its strength would eventually wane and flow down the long river of time. Unless the black-scaled dragon's power was able to rip the time area right away, and its speed was fast enough to ignore the time delay and bolt through the time area. It did not matter how ferociously it attacked. It was not able to harm Han Senator. Time Ghost was one of the top-class true god xenogeniacs in the universe. The power of its beast soul was like a true god treasure. It did not matter how strong the black-scale true dragon was. It was not fast enough to tear through the Time Ghost area. Han Sen dared to visit the Big Baron systems for an adventure. The time area was one of his trump cards. When he had met the big goldfish, he hadn't tried using any of his tricks. He had not used the time area. Now that the shield of the Medusa's gaze had been taken away by the black dragon, Han Sen was not going to keep his true strength concealed any longer. He had no qualms about using the Time Ghost beast souls. Han Sen stepped through space, running toward the black-scaled dragon. The dragon's mouth fired draconic presence at him, and the shield of the Medusa's gaze fired its staring lights. When the dragon presence and stare lights entered the time area, they were severely delayed. Even the staring lights, which normally traveled at the speed of light, took a whole light year to travel just a few feet. They disappeared before they reached Han Senator. The black-scaled dragon realized that its dragon presence was not having much of an effect, which completely shocked the beast. Still, the shock only lasted a split second. In the next moment, the black-scaled dragon used its other talon to hold the stone lantern in front of itself. It then blew on the lantern. The black-scaled dragon's presence went through the lantern and was enveloped by the white flame. It went hovering toward Han's. Senator Han's son felt a chill, but he did not dare underestimate his enemy. He knew the stone lantern's power was nothing ordinary. The black-scaled dragon was still able to use the shield of the Medusa's gaze and fire the staring lights. It was probably all because of what the stone lantern was able to imbue. Now the dragon presence had flames. It was heading straight for Han's. Senator, he was staring at it. When the dragon presence entered the time area, it was not affected by the time delay. It was still quickly headed for Han Sr. This stone lantern really is evil. Han Sen's eyes were on fire. He stared at the stone lantern and dragon presence, which was not entwined with the white fire. He was not freaking out. Han Sen wanted to make a move, but Bauer, who was on his back, suddenly jumped up. She was wearing sunglasses. While she was in space, her body exhibited some changes. She suddenly looked like the big black-scaled dragon. After Bauer turned into a black-scaled dragon and opened her wide mouth, a tide of black dragon presence was fired out. It struck the dragon presence with the white fire. The two dragon presences kept colliding with each other. The universe around was shaking. The ice fields were suddenly exploding. Han Sen was shocked and happy. This is so weird. The sunglasses can turn Bauer into a black-scaled dragon, and she can use the black-scaled dragon's dragon presence. The two dragon presences kept striking each other. They then suddenly vanished. Seeing the same black-scaled dragon in front of it, the original black-scaled dragon froze. After that, the black dragon was extremely angry. It looked at Bauer and let out a dragon cry that could go through the clouds and break rocks. The dragon cry became a natural shockwave going toward Bauer. Bauer unleashed a dragon cry of her own. It went right back at the black-scaled dragon. Two scary shockwaves were striking each other in space. There were many sounds like things being broken. After they collided, the result of the fight was a tie. The black-scaled dragon was furious. As it made another dragon cry and unleashed more dragon presence, the dragon's scales shone with a strange light. All kinds of powers were headed toward Bauer. It was insane. It covered the sky and ground. Bauer was not weak. She also used many powers. The fight between her and the black-scaled dragon was a tie. Aside from the shield of the Medusa's gaze and the stone lantern, whatever power the black-scaled dragon used could also be used by Bauer. Her power was on par with the black-scaled dragon. The sunglasses are a very powerful god personality armament. I do not know which god spirit's god personality made it. Han Sen was shocked by what he was witnessing. Seeing its power being completely blocked by Bauer, the black-scaled dragon was shocked and scared. It madly roared and raised its stone lantern again. Its dragon eyes were as deep as a black hole, as it stared at the stone lantern's flames, and fired two black lights. When the black light went past the flame, it turned white. Bauer was not going to look weak to her adversary. Her eyes became dragon eyes. She opened them wide and fired out two black lights, but she did not have a lantern to dye it. Bauer's light was still pitch black. The black and white lights shot into the air. They were different from the dragon's presence. This time when they struck each other, Bauer's black light was broken by the white light with ease. The white light was going toward Bauer. Bauer was shocked. Her body rolled. Her giant black-scaled dragon body turned a very small bee. The white light missed her and struck the ice and snow instead. The ice and snow fields vanished when they were hit by the white light. It was like it had all turned into nothing. The little bee Bauer had become flew back to Han. Senator Bauer recovered her body and snuggled into Han Sen's chest. She patted herself on the chest and said, "That stone lantern is so strong. You just watch for now. See how Dad will get rid of it." After Han Sen said that, he picked Bauer up and put her behind him. He then went toward the black-scaled dragon. With a simple teleport, Han Sen was directly in front of the black-scaled dragon. The dragon spat out some dragon presence. It hurriedly did it, so it did not have time to collect the ravaging light. Han Sen did not have his time area active. He used all of his power and put it into the jade skin. Both of his fists were like tsunamis going toward the dragon presence. When it met the jade skin power, the dragon presence froze in the air. But the dragon presence was too strong. It was only able to freeze by a single layer. The dragon presence kept coming from behind. It broke the ice and landed on Han's senator. Boom. Han's son was flushed away by the dragon presence. He was like an ant in a tsunami. The jade skin power was not enough to fight the dragon presence. Han Sen's true god power was like paper in front of the black-scaled dragon's dragon presence. Blurg. After the dragon presence weakened, Han Sen's body flew away. He coughed up blood, but he was not injured. His clothes were not harmed. He had hurt an organ but not by much. Why am I not injured badly? Han Sen thought he would be badly wounded, but his wound was very small. He looked at himself. It was the effect of the blue and black robe. The black dragon saw it worked and got excited. The dragon cries and dragon presence were all beckoning Han. Senator the dragon was not in a rush to use the stone lantern. Han Sen's heart jumped. He raised his hand and pulled the black and blue robe out. He threw it to Bauer. He waved his fist toward the black dragon's dragon presence and shouted, "Hold on to my clothes. Watch how Daddy kills the black dragon." Chapter 29-24 Killing the Black Dragon. Pang. 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 Han Sen's body kept shaking in space. The dragon presence, dragon eye lights, dragon scales, and many other dragon different powers were hitting him. Although Han's son tried his best to block them, because of the difference in power levels, he was getting more wounded with every second. Blood that looked like crystals was coming out of all of his wounds. God only knew how many bones had been broken in his body. It made Han Sen's entire presence look terrible. The black-scaled dragon was very excited. It kept firing dragon breath. All its dragon scales cut across Han Sen's body. The beast really enjoyed killing, and it was not in a rush to use the stone lantern to get rid of Han Senator. Pang. Han Sen's shoulder was struck by the dragon eye light. His left shoulder bone totally vanished. It was like he had been bitten by an invisible monster. The wound shone with blood crystals. Han's son was in extreme pain. He frowned, but his expression did not change. He coldly looked at the black dragon and said, "Are you having fun?" Han Sen's body was now riddled with 1,000 holes. There was no telling how many times the black dragon had hit him. If Han's son had been an ordinary true god Xenogeniac, he would have died. Luckily, Han Sen's body had been reinforced 4 times. That was what had enabled him to survive up until now. Of course, he had deliberately done that. Otherwise, half of the wounds on his body could have been avoided. Han's son had not planned on dodging. He even deliberately used his body to make sure he got hit. The only attacks he evaded were the ones that would have surely killed him. Roar! The black dragon did not care about any of that. It released some dragon cries. It wanted to hurt Han's son again. This time, Han's son did not allow his body to take the hit. He pulled out a Buddha light, which was shaped like a moon, from his waist. It was a very thin knife. The moment Han's son pulled out the knife, the Buddha light covered his body. Han Sen's wounds almost instantly disappeared. His body was back in tip-top condition. The cause karma knife unleashed the Buddha light on his aggressor. It was like a sun flooding the universe in bright light. Han Sen did not say anything. He slashed toward the black-scaled dragon's dragon cry attack. The scary knife light was like a blade that tore through the sky. It broke the dragon cry's shockwaves and proceeded toward the black dragon. He used the cause karma knife for this attack because it had the ability to absorb all the damage he had just endured. The power that had accumulated was almost equal to all of the attacks Han Sen had accepted. With Han Sen's own power, along with the powerful knife skills, even a true god top-class Xenogeniacs like the black-scaled dragon was shocked. It did not dare accept such an attack. It twisted its body. It was like a dragon in space trying to escape. It was a shame it had underestimated the cause karma knife power so much. The cause was already there, and the karma would come. The black-scaled dragon had to use its own power to block it. It could not escape the light. The dragon saw the knife light coming right for it. It was tearing through space. No matter what the beast tried to do, it could not establish a distance between it. It lowered its head, wanting to blow the stone lantern in its hands. It wanted to use the stone lantern's fire power to break this attack. The dragon breath came out from its mouth, as if it was miles away. It was unable to blow the lantern flame in front of him. Han Sen's time area could not affect the stone lantern, but it was able to affect the black dragon. Han Sen used a time area to limit the dragon from emitting its dragon presence. He delayed his opponent to buy time. The dragon presence could not reach the flame of the lantern, which was actually quite close to it. When the dragon realized what was going on, it was too late. At that moment, the knife light came down. It struck the black dragon's forehead. The black dragon was past the point of no return. It did not plan on doing anything else. It gathered up power and used its head to take the hit. Catcha! Dragon blood came out like a spring of water. The dragon's head was cut open by Han Sen's knife. It was cut clean through the center. The purple knife light also traveled through it with a scary ripping power. The way the power went forward was like it was splitting bamboo. It cut open half of the black dragon's big body. Han Sen did not have time to see if the black dragon was dead or not. His body flashed and teleported directly before the black dragon. He took the stone lantern. If it was not for the stone lantern, even though it was a true god elite, Han Sen would not have had so much trouble eliminating the fiend. Han Sen grabbed the stone lantern and teleported away. He teleported to another of the dragon's talons. He wanted to retrieve the shield of the Medusa's gaze. Before his fingers touched the shield, the black dragon's claws swept backward. Its body, which had been cut in half, was combined again. The wounds instantly recovered like it had not been injured before. That's a very powerful body recovery power, Han Sen complimentarily said. The body recovery power of Dragon Xenogeneics was strong. This black dragon in particular was quite outstanding. It was like it had an immortal body. The black-scale dragon saw the stone lantern being taken, and he was furious. Black clouds rose and carried endless suppression on its way toward Han Sr. Ignorant little dragon. How dare you offend God's father? If you do not stop, I am going to kill you. Han Sen was holding the stone lantern. He generated his Xian Yellow Sutra power. He pointed at the flame and pierced it. When the Xian Yellow power went through the flame, it touched the white flame. It made the Xian Yellow power turn white. It was headed for the black scales dragon. Han Sen felt like the stone lantern was something of a booster. After the Xian Yellow Sutra was cast through the lantern, the power had been increased by a great magnitude. Buzz! The Xian Yellow Sutra broke the dragon presence and landed on the black-scaled dragon. Han Sen saw the dragon's giant black self-cogwheel get pushed by the Xian Yellow power. It was spinning backward. The black-scaled dragon's face changed as its body began to twitch and transform. It tried to fight the Xian Yellow power, but nothing worked. Its body quickly devolved and its power went weak. He went from true god to butterfly class. Han Sen was happy. With the power he had, it should have been hard to turn the black-scaled dragon's self-cogwheel. Now he had the stone lantern to close the gap. He made the big black-scaled dragon turn into butterfly class. It didn't take long, but it was still very shocking. This is a very good stone lantern. It is so powerful. I am afraid this is stronger than a god personality armament like Skyvine Radish. Han Sen was elated. Now, he did not have the time to admire his handiwork. He pulled out his knife and slashed toward the black-scaled dragon. The dragon had been true god class, so Han Sen was unable to beat it. Now that it was butterfly class, Han Sen could easily beat the black-scaled dragon. Using the time area, the black-scaled dragon was unable to escape. It slashed like mad, cutting the black-scaled dragon into pieces. The black-scaled dragon was not dead yet. Han Sen used his under-the-sky knife skill. It made countless knife lights cross each other. It cut the dragon's body to pieces. The dragon's body was becoming true god class again. It was going to put its body back together again after it had been sliced into pieces. Han Sen saw something shining inside the dragon's mouth. He slashed and broke the shiny thing. Blurg! The dragon's dead body was like a leaking balloon. It quickly deflated. Dragon blood started to gush out. Han Sen was covered with dragon blood. Chapter 29-25 Sacred Ruin, Xenogeneic Deified Hunted. Dead Area Demon Dragon. Deified Xenogeneic Gene found. The announcement played in Han Sen's head. He felt a bit disappointed. It was such a powerful Xenogeneic, but it did not leave behind a beast's soul. That was a shame. I am afraid that in this universe, it might be difficult to find another Dead Area Demon Dragon. Han Sun licked his lips and felt a bit disheartened. He spoke to himself sadly. The ability to get a beast soul, or not, was something Han Sun could not control. As for what the chances were, he did not know yet. According to what God told him, God's spirits and beast souls had to have been composed of the spirits of creatures. Every creature had a spirit, so why was it that one could only get beast souls by killing xenogeneics in the universe? Why was a beast soul not given every time? Han Sun did not understand the reasons behind all of that. If every xenogeneic had a spirit, then killing a xenogeneic should have definitely yielded a beast soul. But it wasn't like that. This dead area demon dragon's deified xenogeneic gene should be enough to get my deified gene tally up to 100. But this guy is too big. I do not know how long it will take me to eat it all. Han Sun looked at the dragon's body, which looked like a giant rock. It made a wry smile develop on his face. Although his consume was at the highest level, swallowing such a big dragon body would still take a long time. He would have to spend 10 days to half a month eating it. The black dragon is dead. I wonder if there are any other treasures to find on the 3 Black Mountains. Han Sun raised his hand and held the stone lantern high. He was still feeling a bit greedy. He called Bauer and put her in a blanket. The two of them headed up the 3 Black Stone Mountains. They did not find any treasure. In the center of the 3 mountains, there was a circular valley. At the bottom of the valley was an old teleporter. It was unknown where it led. Han Sun did not know where the teleporter went, so he did not want to try it. He had to leave the valley and play with the stone lantern he had. The stone lantern was strange. Han Sun could not activate its power and/or control it. If he put his power through the fire, the flames imbued strength into the power he passed through it. It did not matter what power went through the flames. Any power was boosted. That was true for anyone who used it. What is this stone lantern? It does not look like a god personality armament, and it does not look like a xenogeneic treasure. It kind of looks like a race lantern from the Geno Hall. But it is not quite the same as them either. Han Sun studied the lantern for a while. He was still unable to find out what the stone lantern was. If it was safe to use, Han Sun was not going to research it too much. He put it inside Destiny's tower and went to start eating the dead area demon dragon's flesh. After he took a few bites, he saw a gold and red light appear in the sky. The big goldfish was flying toward him. It had brought the little goldfish along, because the big goldfish had not lied, and Han Sun had maxed out his genes after eating the dead area demon dragon. He was not planning on killing either goldfish. When it saw the body of the dead area demon dragon, the big goldfish looked very excited. It brought the little goldfish before Han Sun and kept firing bubbles, as if it was trying to say something. Bauer translated the bubbles. It says thank you for killing the dead area demon dragon for it. He and his child appreciate it a lot. If the chance ever arises, it wants to return the favor someday. Of course, you need to pay me back. Just show up whenever I need you, Han Sun said to the goldfish and its kid. The goldfish family seemed to understand Han Sun's words and nodded. The big goldfish spat out many bubbles at Han Senator after that. It swam to the top of the 3 Black Mountains. It turned its head and fired many more bubbles to Han Sr. It said the dead area demon dragon is dead, Bauer said. Now the child can finally be returned home. It wants to invite us to its house. Han Sun looked at the big goldfish with curiosity and asked, Your home would not happen to reside on the other side of the teleporter, would it? The big goldfish nodded. It spat out many bubbles. Bauer tried to explain. It said its home is on the other side of the teleporter. Something that happened many years ago was the whole reason it teleported to this place. Then, the dead area demon dragon took over the teleporter. They have been unable to go back. Now that you have killed the dead area demon dragon, they are finally able to go home. So they are really grateful. They want you to go and visit them. They will also reward you with some more treasures too. Sure. I don't mind going there. Upon hearing there was treasure to be found, Han Sun stopped hesitating. He put the dead area demon dragon meat inside Destiny's tower and followed the big goldfish into the teleporter. He now understood it completely. People said fish only had a 7-second memory. Whether or not it was true was unknown. This big goldfish was a top-class deified xenogeneic. Its intelligence and memory were not so good. Han Sun estimated its intelligence, and did not think it was able to lie to people. So he was not too worried. He held on to Bauer and followed after the big and small goldfishes to the teleporter. The big goldfish's body released a red light. The light went into the teleporter. The teleporter was activated. It started to glow. Han Sun felt as if his eyes had gone black. When his vision returned to normal, he was no longer in the snowfields. It was all dark up front. There was no space. There was no hint of the universe around. There was no land, and there were no mountains. It was like nothing. It was just a pitch-black void. In front of that black nothingness, there was a broken stone door. That door only had 2 broken stone pillars left. The stone of the roof was broken. He saw half of a sign hanging on the broken roof. There was a lamp in front of the door. It was releasing some obscenely dim yellow light. Han Sun only saw half of the sign, which said the word holy. Is this place a ruin that belonged to sacred? Han Sun was shocked. He was not able to think of any other race that would dare use the word holy aside from sacred. The big goldfish led the small goldfish toward the broken door. The big goldfish looked very confused. It seemed as if it did not recognize the place. Han Sun held Bauer and followed. Before the big goldfish walked in front of the door, it saw the door release some cold light. The big goldfish was not prepared. It was shot in the forehead. Blood was everywhere. It was like a very sharp arrow pierced into the big goldfish's forehead. Although the arrowhead did not go deep, it broke the big goldfish's protective substance chains. That arrow was very strong. How dare you come to sacred? Do you guys want to die? A very dim voice came from the left side of the stone pillar. They then saw someone walk out from behind the stone pillar. That someone, who had a human body and a dog face, was holding a teethy bow. There were 3 teethy arrows on the person's back. The person reached out a hand. The teeth arrow lodged in the big goldfish's head flew back into the person's hands. The wound on the big goldfish ripped. Blood came out with the arrow. It could not be stopped. Chapter 29-26 Dog, Hybrid. The big goldfish was very angry. All of its red scales straightened up. Many red scale blades came out from his body. It was like there was a sky full of light heading for the dog-faced man. The dog-faced man coldly grunted. He took 2 steps back. He went behind the stone pillar. There were 10,000 red scale lights landing on the door. The broken pillar next to the door had a space swirl generate. The red scale lights landed on it, and it vanished. It was like it had absorbed the door. Very good, sacred. The door is broken and only 2 pillars remain. But it can still hold firm against an attack delivered by a true god creature. It is no wonder why they were the scariest existence in the universe. Han Sun sighed. The dog-faced man stood behind the stone pillar. While the big goldfish power was absorbed by the door, he quickly fired another 2 arrows. He rapidly fired at the goldfish family. The big goldfish fired a barrage of bubbles. He did it to prohibit the flight of the 2 arrows. The 2 teeth arrows were still able to pierce the bubbles and not get caught by them. The big goldfish was shocked and angry, but it was too late for it to block. The big goldfish moved and dodged the 2 teeth arrows. The little goldfish was not able to move so quickly. It was going to be shot in the head. The teeth arrows were able to damage the big goldfish, but the little goldfish was only larva class. The arrow was going to pierce through its head and body. Dong! Seeing the teeth arrow was going to perforate the head of the small goldfish, a knife suddenly slashed against the teeth arrow. The teeth arrow flew away. The small goldfish went behind the big goldfish. Han Sun was holding the cause karma knife. He was just standing there looking at the dog-faced man. He asked, "What is your name? Who from sacred are you?" The dog-faced man should have been a xenogeneic, as well as true god class. He must have been quite famous in the sacred leagues. "You are just a crystallizer, a servant of sacred, yet you don't know my name." The dog-faced man grabbed the teeth arrow that had flown back. His eyes looked very evil. He drew the bowstring again, and aimed at Han Senator. When the bowstring was pulled, Han Sun felt a huge amount of power go into that draw. It made people feel very scared. It was like some toxic snake was ready to launch itself at any second. As Han Sun stared at the bow, he thought, This dog-faced man's power is average for a true god. He is not as strong as me, but his bow is a bit weird. The dog-faced man smiled. The teeth arrow in his hands was launched. The teeth arrow disappeared in space. It was like it could teleport through space to land on Han Sr. Ha! You have a death wish. Upon seeing Han's son get shot, the dog-faced man let out a cruel laugh. In the next second, the dog-faced man saw Han's son appear in front of him. The area on Han Sen's body that had been hit with the arrow was fading. Pat! Han's son slapped the dog-faced man in the face. The dog-faced man went flying back against the stone pillar. Han's son took his bow away. You are very cheap, and your arrow skills are bad. Let me teach you how to really use a bow. Han's son was holding the bow. He pulled the string back and aimed at the dog-faced man, who was stumbling back onto his feet and crawling closer. The dog-faced man wanted to shout so badly, but he saw the arrow was being aimed at him. He was shocked. The cold sweat that had developed on his brow was starting to soak his entire body. It was like someone was strangling him, making it difficult to breathe. The dog-faced man had a weird feeling. He felt that if he moved an inch, the teeth arrow was going to break his brain. So the dog-faced man stood where he was and did not dare to move. He continued to sweat. How is that possible? He is just a crystallizer servant. How is he so powerful? The dog-faced man was sweating profusely, but he did not move. He was shocked. Han's son was getting ready to shoot the dog-faced man when he suddenly felt the teleporter move. He saw a few people appear at the teleporter. It was Ancient Abyss Grandmaster and the others. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster was shocked to see Han's son there. They had not stopped in their journey and had traveled at a blistering pace. Yet, Han's son had already reached the sacred ruin before them. Upon seeing more creatures appear, the big goldfish swam toward Han's son with the little goldfish. He was looking at them. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster looked at Han's son and the big goldfish. He then glanced at the dog-faced man with a bow aiming right at him. He smiled as he asked, Han Godfather, what is the situation here? Han's son said, I do not know what this Xenogeniac is. He was hiding behind the pillar firing arrows. Give me a minute, Grandmaster. Let me get rid of this Xenogeniac, and I will talk to you. You are just a crystallizer servant, the dog-faced man said while gnashing his teeth. How dare you say that? If you dare touch me, my mother will kill you so badly that you won't even have a body left to bury. Oh, and who is your mother? Han's son looked at the dog-faced man. The dog-faced man gnashed his teeth and said, My mother is Moon Shadow God. If you touch me, she will rip you to shreds. Moon Shadow God? Does someone like that belong in sacred? I have never heard of them before. Han's son had a long think about it. Out of the 10 generals and 4 sacred beasts, there was no one with that name. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster looked surprised. He looked at the dog-faced man and asked, Is your mother Moon Shadow God? Yes, my mother is Moon Shadow God. My name is Chiga. If you know how powerful my mother is, then give me back the dog crow bow. Otherwise you are all dead. For someone to know his mother's name, it made the dog-faced man very cocky. Han's son looked at Ancient Abyss Grandmaster. He was not afraid of anyone. He just wanted to know who Moon Shadow God was. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster smiled and spoke to Han Sr. Haven't you heard about Moon Shadow God? You must have surely heard about Crow Sky Dog. One of Sacred's 10 generals? Han's son asked. He is the one called Crow Sky Dog. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster looked at Chiga as he said, Yes. Crow Sky God was one of Sacred's generals who guarded the door. Moon Shadow God was his wife. He was a true god Xenogeniac, but they were not of the same race. Judging from this guy's face, he does look like Crow Sky Dog and Moon Shadow God's hybrid child. You are right. He is the dog hybrid from Crow Sky Dog and Moon Shadow God. A voice came out from Sacred's door. Someone soon walked out. Han's son, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster, and all the others looked towards there. They saw the person walk out of the dark. He was wearing a gold robe. He had white hair and a white beard. He was an old man, but his bones were very strong. He looked very powerful. Although he was walking alone, he seemed like a king coming forth. He was so powerful that one could not describe it. 9,000 King. When Ancient Abyss Grandmaster, and a few of the extreme king deified elite saw the gold-robed elder. Their expressions changed. One of the deified elites screamed, "I did not expect that in this universe. There are some who still remember me," 9,000 King coldly said. Chapter 29-27 Worse than animals. When Chiga saw 9,000 King, his expression changed. Han Sun was aiming the bow at his face. He didn't dare to move, but his face kept changing. Han Sun frowned and looked at 9,000 King. He did not know who he was. Han Sun did not know much about sacred, and he had never heard of this person. 9,000 King looked at Han Senator. He then glanced at Chiga and quietly said, "This dog hybrid is not important to me." After that, 9,000 King walked over to Chiga. It was like he did not even notice Han Sun was standing there holding the bow. Han Sun kept the bow trained on Chiga. He coldly shouted, "Did I agree to hand him over to you? If there is something I want, I do not require the approval of anyone to take it." 9,000 King did not look at Han Senator. He continued walking over to Chiga. Han Sen's eyes were locked on his target. The bow in his hands released a scary power. It was going to fire the teeth arrow. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster suddenly said, "Brother Han, Chiga's father is Sacred's door guard general. Maybe he knows about the sacred inside. Perhaps we should just keep him alive." Han Sen knew he was saying that to smooth the tension that had arisen between him and 9,000 King. "Thank you for reminding me, but this is my prey. No one else can touch him." Han Sun did not move. The power in the bow was becoming stronger. Chiga sensed that if Han Sun let go of the teeth arrow, he would be killed. He would not even be able to dodge it. His body was full of cold sweat. He rolled his eyes before looking at 9,000 King and begging, 9,000 King, I am willing to lead the way for you. Please help me." 9,000 King turned around and looked at Han Senator. He coldly said, "Do not think you can be bossy to me just because you have the dog crow bow in your hands. Try shooting me if you have the balls to do so." Han Sun did not speak. He let his fingers go, allowing the teeth arrow to fly toward Chiga. There was a buzzing noise, resulting in the dog teeth arrow disappearing midair. The dog crow bow was able to rip space. The arrows fired from it had teleportation powers. Ordinary creatures could not dodge them. Chiga was shocked and tried retreating. Although he had the dog crow bow, it was a relic that belonged to his father. He knew he could not dodge the teeth arrow. Being shot by an ordinary arrow was fine, but the teeth arrow had rabid power. If he was shot by a teeth arrow, the rabid power would invade his body. It would turn him into a mad dog that would try biting everyone. He would not be able to think anymore, and would become worse than an animal. As Chiga was falling back in shock, a hand appeared in front of him. It held the teeth arrow that was in the air. It was 9,000 King's hand. 9,000 King, save me please. I am willing to be your cow. I will be your horse. I will be your servant and slave. I can lead you to sacred. Chiga was crawling before 9,000 King, begging and pleading. 9,000 King ignored Chiga, who was at his feet. He held the arrow and coldly looked at Han Sr. "It looks like I have not been out for too long. The universe has mostly forgotten my name." While they were talking, 9,000 King made the teeth arrow in his hands flicker with a weird kind of power. It was like smoke and fire. A gold power seemed to cover the entire arrow. Buzz! Suddenly, 9,000 King fired the teeth arrow back at Han Senator. Although there was no dog crow bow buff or rip space power, the teeth arrow was just as fast as teleporting. Han Sen saw a gold light flash as the teeth arrow came right before his throat. The sweat on his skin could feel the sharpness of the arrowhead. Han Sun did not move. He did not want to dodge. He waved his sleeves. The sleeves of the blue robe wrapped around the flickering teeth arrow. He pulled it down and put it in his hands. The gold light on the arrow was gone. 9,000 King frowned. He looked at Han Sun with an even colder look. "To establish peace," Ancient Abyss Grandmaster said, "Sacred is a very dangerous place. Why are you two trying to kill each other over something so petty? If things are like that, you will be giving an advantage to the elites inside Sacred." After pausing, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster looked at Chiga and said, "Plus, although this guy is the child of Crow Sky Dog, after Sacred changed, it is different now. It is not just him. Even if his father came, he might not be able to show us sacred. It is useless. It does not matter if he is useful or not. Whoever goes against me should die. 9000 King coldly looked at Han. Senator Han Sun icily responded, "You're right. His usefulness does not matter. He is my prey. I will not let anyone else touch him." The two of them stared at each other. Their bodies simmered with a scary presence. Neither one of them wanted to take a step back. Suddenly, a shadow flashed near the door. Someone else had arrived. This time, it was a pretty woman in black clothing. Chiga saw the black-clothed pretty woman and crawled over to her. "Mother, save me." "Moon Shadow God, stay out of this," 9000 King said. He reached out his hand to pull back Chiga, who was in the process of running over to the black-clothed pretty woman. Some invisible power drew Chiga back. He was rolling back to 9000 King's hands. Moon Shadow God's expression changed. Her body turned into a shadow. She appeared in 9000 King's shadow. A black shadow knife came thrusting toward 9 Shadow King. 9 Shadow King shone with a bright gold light. It melted the knife shadow. The countless knife lights were headed for Moon Shadow God, which forced her to retreat. At this time, Chiga was sucked into 9000 King's hands. He was grabbed by the throat, so he started to cry. Moon Shadow God's face looked angry as she shouted, 9000 King, let go of my child. I can let him go. If you listen to me, he can be half my son. I would not hurt him then. 9000 King looked evil as he checked out Moon Shadow God. How dare you? Moon Shadow God was furious. She was shaking. A shadow flickered on her body. It turned into a night blade that covered the sky. It went straight for 9000 King. 9000 King did not move. He grabbed Chiga and released 1,000 lights. All those knives cut Chiga and made his body bleed as he screamed. What do you want from me? Moon Shadow God had to stop the assault of her night blades. If she kept going, Chiga would be killed first. Back then, you were stolen by that bastard evil sky dog. I am going to take you back. You just follow me, and I will treat you guys nicely. When I get Sacred Leader's relic, you will be rewarded by it. 9000 King flashed an evil smile. Moon Shadow God looked frightened. Before she spoke, Chiga was getting cut by the gold light. He was screaming and crying, Dad, you will be my dad. We will follow you. It is our pleasure to follow you. Mother, Dad is very strong. To be able to follow him, it is our pleasure. Just agree with him. Upon seeing this, Han Sun and the Extreme King's deified elites present were frozen. They had never seen such an obscene creature before. He was a true god creature, yet he behaved like that. He was already worse than an animal. Chapter 29-28 Going to Sacred Moon Shadow God was so angry that she was shaking. She shouted, Shut up. 9000 King laughed and let go of Chiga. He let him land next to his feet. He touched his face and laughed. Good. You are a good boy. Chiga quickly said, To have a powerful father like you, I must have fulfilled a few lifetimes of good deeds to be rewarded so handsomely. I don't just have to be your child either. I can be your cow. I can be your horse. I can be your servant and slave. It would be my pleasure. I never dreamed of being able to have such an amazing, invincible father like you before. Han Sun and the Extreme King could not watch this anymore. After all, this was a child of the 10 generals. They did not expect him to behave like this. When 9000 King heard what was said, he smiled. He squinted his eyes and placed his hand on Chiga's head. He looked at Moon Shadow God with a cocky expression. Moon Shadow, now that your son has agreed, you should be fine with this too. Moon Shadow God was furious. She also knew that regardless of how much Chiga begged, if she did not agree, 9000 King would crush Chiga's head. No matter how much she did not want to, Chiga was still her son. She didn't have an option to say no. She did not want to see her son die in front of her. While 9000 King, Moon Shadow God, and her son were entangled with their own matters, Han Sun went over to Ancient Abyss Grandmaster and asked, Who is this 9000 King? I have never heard of someone like that in Sacred before. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster did not immediately say anything. A voice soon sounded in Han Sen's ear. Although 9000 King was not one of the top 10 generals, He was an officer of Sacred. Although he was not as famous as the 10 generals, he is not someone ordinary. After Sacred was destroyed, people assumed he was dead. I did not expect to find him alive. While the Big Baron power was the weakest, he came to the Sacred ruins. It looks like he wants that thing from Sacred. Han Sen nodded. He knew many scary people were going to the ruins, so this could not have been a coincidence. Han Sen did not say anything. Besides, he did not know much about the topic. It was just a coincidence that he was there. The more he spoke, the more wrong he was. He preferred not to say anything. Moon Shadow, have you thought about it? There is not much time, so stop delaying your son's business. 9000 King looked evil as he patted Chiga on the head. Moon Shadow God replied, 9000 King, let go of my son. If you do, I will let you do anything. Although she really wanted to kill him, she had to think about her son with Evil Sky Dog. He was the only connection they had now, and she did not want to see it severed. Ha! Ha! 9000 Kind looked at the sky and laughed. Moon Shadow, do not worry. Why would I do anything bad to our son? He is such a good son. I will be happy to accept him. I will reward him and not hurt him. Chiga was very happy. He kowtowed as he shared his gratitude. Thanks, Dad. 9000 King was still acting cocky. He patted Chiga on the head and smiled. Good son. Very good son. I really should reward you. Chiga rolled his eyes. He stared at Han's son and said, to be your son is the greatest reward. I would not dare try and take your rewards, but that crystallizer slave dared to disrespect you. He deserves to die. I am not strong enough to fight him. Otherwise, I would skin him alive in the name of avenging you. As for the dog crow bow, I want to retrieve it so I can give it to you. It will be a gift for the gratitude I feel for you. Han's son looked at Ancient Abyss Grandmaster. They thought that guy was the ultimate rare thing. He was like an extreme animal. Even now he still wanted to bite Han Sr. Good son. That is not so hard. 9000 King looked at Han's son and quietly asked, did you hear him? Give the dog crow bow back to my son. Chiga shouted, Dad, stop talking crap with him. Just kill him. Han's son looked at Chiga. He raised the dog crow bow again and coldly said, I said the life of my prey is decided by me. The bow was being pointed at Chiga. He was shocked, but he saw that 9000 King was right next to him. He had the courage again to mock Han Sr. How dare you to misbehave before my father? You have a death wish. Han's son ignored him. He thought Chiga was a mad dog and stupid. 9000 King must have been worried about something. Otherwise he would have already attacked. There should have been no need for simple provocation. Even 9000 King did not dare do anything. He was a fox trying to prove that he was a tiger. Buzz! Han's son let an arrow loose. The teeth arrow was gone. It was clearly going for Chiga. Chiga's expression changed, but it quickly returned to normal. He saw 9000 King raise his hand again. He thought 9000 King would catch the teeth arrow just like before. Suddenly, the teeth arrow pierced through Chiga's head and came out the other side. Chiga's eyes were wide open. He could not believe he was about to die like that. Time power. 9000 King's expression changed too. His hand only reached out a short distance, so he was unable to catch the arrow. Moon Shadow God looked shocked and very conflicted. She ran to hold Chiga's dead body. She gnashed her teeth, looked at Han's son and screamed, I will kill you. After that she turned into a shadow. She blended in with the darkness and disappeared. 9000 King steadily stared at Han's Senator. His power seemed red. He was suppressing Han's son, who was just standing there. He looked like he was going to kill Han's son any second, but he had yet to do anything. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster asked, if you guys fight here before entering Sacred, are you not going to benefit other people? I will let you live a bit longer. 9000 King coldly grunted. He turned around and fled through the door. He vanished into the darkness. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster turned to Han's son and said, Brother Han, you really should not have killed Chiga. Now we have offended two scary elites at once. That mad dog was worse than an animal. He bit whoever he saw. It was better to just kill him. Han's son did not care. He planned on going to Sacred to save Little Flower. Even if Sacred's 10 generals or 4 holy beasts were there, they would not stop him. Besides, Chica was just a dog hybrid with a bark worse than his bite. Right, never mind then. Let's go to Sacred. Otherwise, they will have the chance first. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster paused. He smiled at Han Sr. If you do not mind, why don't you come with me? Then we will all have backup. If you don't mind our presence, of course, we will come. Han Sun called Bauer, who was riding atop the big goldfish. They followed Ancient Abyss Grandmaster through the door. As for Chiga's dead body, Han Sun did not bother looking at it. There was only a killing announcement in his head, and no mention of beast souls. There wasn't even a xenogenic gene. Chica was obviously useless rubbish. Chapter 29 Long Bright Lantern. It was completely dark behind the broken door. Aside from a long, bright lantern that shone on a part of the area, nothing else could be seen. After Han Sun stepped past the stone pillar, he realized that behind every pillar there was a long, bright lantern. They looked like street lamps that went all the way into the darkness. Aside from the very dim, long, bright lanterns that shone, every other area around them was pitch black. Even with the Dongxian Sutras feeling power, one could not go into the darkness. Han Sun saw many broken universal cogwheels on the edge of the darkness. Everyone was shocked by the scene. What kind of fight took place here? Even the most basic universal cogwheels that built the foundation of the universe are broken. Han Sun felt a chill. He did not dare be reckless. The darkness was like a silent big beast. It was open like a scary and bloody maw. If anyone entered the darkness, the big beast would consume them. That was a feeling that struck everyone's mind. Even the extreme king deified elites felt very serious about the situation they were in. They looked into the darkness with proper nervousness. Brother Han, the darkness down that way is very dangerous, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster said. Even if a true god elite was to fall into the darkness, he would not live. Therefore, we have to follow the long, bright lanterns. We cannot leave the radius of light cast by the lanterns. Thank you for telling me, Grandmaster. After Han Sun said thank you, he looked at the big goldfish. It had been hurt by the dog teeth arrows earlier, and the wound had not yet been fixed. The fish was still bleeding. Although it did not bleed much, the big goldfish did not look too good. Its face was a bit twisted, and its eyes did not look too well. The life force of the creature was fine, but Han Sun did not think its body was. Did that arrow have a poison power? Han Sun used his Dongxian aura to scan the big goldfish's wound. He soon found a red substance. It was drilling through the big goldfish's wound. It was like there were many small bugs inside the wound that could not be seen. Han Sun used a few healing geno arts, but they were not working on the red bugs inside the wound. Han Sun had a closer inspection. He noticed that the big goldfish's eyes had a lot of blood in them. The blood was actually those red bugs. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster took notice of Han Sun's situation. He came closer and said, "If I am not mistaken, the wound your pet suffered has inflicted it with rabid powers." Han Sun quickly asked, "What is rabid power? Do you know how to fix it, Grandmaster?" Ancient Abyss looked at the teeth arrow in Han Sun's hand. He said, "Rabid power is Crow Skydog's power. If someone is inflicted with rabid power, that creature will lose their mind. They will go crazy and try to attack every monster they come across until they become exhausted and die. Seeing what has happened, I suspect this is indeed rabid powers. I would guess that there is an 80% to 90% out of 100% chance that the teeth of the teeth arrow you have belonged to Crow Skydog. That is why it has rabid power." After pausing, Ancient Abyss said, "Rabid powers are strange. In the legends, only the fourth holy beast Holy Kirin can fix it. I am not sure if there is another way to fix it." When Han Sun heard what he had to say, he frowned. He had visited Holy Kirin's garden once, but the Holy Kirin was dead. It had been buried in the gardens. It could not heal the big goldfish anymore. Plus, Han Sun did not know where East Holy Garden was from his current location. There was also no way of getting there even if he wanted to go. Han Sun used some healing geno arts on the big goldfish's wounds. He managed to stop the bleeding and make the wound start to recover. But the blood in the big goldfish's eyes steadily grew. It looked scarier and scarier. Han Sun could tell the emotions of the big goldfish were becoming more negative. Han Sen frowned. He knew that was not the way. He hesitated a moment before he summoned spell guns. He fired a few bullets at the big goldfish's body. The bullets went into the big goldfish's scales. Because of a lack of power, they were locked into the scales. Perhaps it was because of the rabid power. But the goldfish did not feel any pain or resist. Han Sen fired 100 bullets from top to bottom. Every now and again, a bullet fired into the big goldfish's flesh. The bullets had a forever solid power. That power made the goldfish's body solid. Although it could not get rid of the rabid power, the rabid power ceased spreading across the big goldfish's body. He watched it for a while. The blood bugs inside the big goldfish's eyes did not increase in their numbers, so Han Sen felt relieved. Han Sen did not have a better way to solve the predicament. For now, that was going to have to do. The big goldfish was like a patient with some slight mental issues. Its face was twisted next to Han Senator. Fortunately, it was not completely controlled by the rabid power. It still had some of its mind. That is a very powerful rabid power in Crow Sky Dog. It is just an arrow made out of teeth. Yet it can turn a true god Xenogeniac into this. I wonder how scary it would be if the felon was still alive. Han Sen was shocked. Crow Sky Dog, who was a door guard, was quite scary. Han Sen could not imagine what things must have been like in Sacred back then. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster, and the others were also shocked. Han Sen was able to suppress rabid powers. They had not expected that outcome. The lights of the long, bright lanterns were dim. They could only see the lanterns on the stone pillars. All of the stone pillars looked extremely old. There were many cracks and signs of damage. They looked as if they were going to collapse into rubble at any moment. The light was just enough for them to reach the next long, bright lantern. All they could see was a radius of about 30 feet. The floor was a gray stone plane. Most of the bricks were broken or lifted. It was hard to find a complete stone brick. Han Sen thought there must have been a fight there before. Suddenly, there was one long, bright lantern missing. Han Sen saw the darkness ahead of them still had long, bright lanterns. In the center, one of the long, bright lanterns had not been lit up for some reason. That area was completely dark. One was unable to see anything. This section doesn't have a long, bright lantern, an extreme king deified said. I do not think it will be easy to get past this. Han Sen stopped and looked into the darkness ahead. The universal cogwheels had not been broken there, but most of the universe there was broken. The universe's rules there were breaking. Do you think we can collect a long, bright lantern and just take it with us? A deified extreme king asked. He was looking at the long, bright lantern ahead of them. Don't do that, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster said with a shake of his head. The lights of these long, bright lanterns can expel the darkness, but their power does not stem from the lantern itself. It comes from the pillar that connects to the earth. If the long, bright lantern leaves the pillar or the pillar is destroyed, there will be no energy source for the lantern. They would be put out immediately. Chapter 29:30. A dark place. Yang Yunsheng, an extreme king deified elite, looked around and said, how did 9,000 king and moon shadow god go through this? The long, bright lanterns only led in a singular direction. They had been traveling all that time, but had yet to see hide nor hair of 9,000 king or moon shadow god. It meant they had to have gone that way. Moon shadow god was the wife of Crow Sky Dog, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster said. She must know quite a few of sacred secrets. It is not surprising that she was able to go through this. If they were able to through this way, there is no reason why we cannot do the same, Yang Yunsheng said. We should just push on and brute force our way through. I agree, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster said. Forcing our way forward is the only way, but we should ensure we are prepared. He waved his sleeves and took out a white umbrella that looked like a jade bone. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster opened the umbrella. The umbrella started to drop white holy light. It covered approximately 30 feet of the area around them. This is called Shining Umbrella, Ancient Abyss Grandmaster said. It has light by Sema power. Perhaps it will work against the pervasive dark. Why don't you guys come with us under the umbrella? He looked at the big and small goldfish and said, these two goldfish are too big. The shining umbrella won't cover them. Why don't we just leave them here and go on ahead? Thank you for your good intention, Grandmaster. Since I brought them this far, I cannot just leave them behind. Grandmaster, you can go on ahead. I will search for another way through this mess. Han Sun was not willing to let go of the goldfish family just yet. It was not like Han Sun had a strong bond with them. It was because they were creatures that belonged to sacred. They likely knew more about sacred than anyone else present. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster tried to convince him. Han Sun kept insisting on bringing the goldfish family, so there was nothing else he could say. He raised the shining umbrella and went into the darkness with Yang Yunsheng and the others. Han Sun saw the shining umbrellas by Sima keep colliding with the darkness. The light of the umbrella was fairly suppressed. There were only 6 more feet of the radius left for them. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster and the others were all squeezed together. It barely kept them all protected on the inside. The Bysema kept quivering in the dark, like it was going to fall apart at any second. It was unknown whether or not they would make it through to reach the next long, bright lantern. The distance between the 2 bright lanterns was 60 to 90 feet. After Ancient Abyss Grandmaster and the others walked a few steps into the dark, they were gone. It was like they had been consumed by the darkness. Han Sun looked at the other side with the next bright lantern. As he gazed upon it, he likened it to a firefly. Yet he was not able to see what was under the lantern. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster and the others barely attempted it. They just walked into the dark. They were clearly prepared for this. How can I get the goldfish through it though? Han Sun was not going to be like Ancient Abyss Grandmaster and just make use of a treasure to walk right in. Han Sun hesitated a moment before he brought out his cold light sword. He walked in front of the darkness and slashed out some pink sword lights through the darkness. The sword lights ran out into the darkness, but they vanished within a second. They did not create anything. There was no reaction. Han Sun frowned. He slowly put the cold light sword's tip into the darkness. The sword barely touched the darkness. Han Sun felt the tip of the cold light sword being twisted by some sort of power. He almost lost his grip on the blade. Han Sun quickly removed the cold light sword from the dark. The cold light sword light had a few cracks in it. That is very scary darkness. Han Sun gasped. He was shocked that the cold light sword, which was almost as good as a true god weapon, had been affected like that. If that dark power was applied to his body, it was difficult to imagine what might happen. Han Sun was a bit annoyed. He did not know how to get through the dark zone. Bauer, who was on his shoulder, asked, "Dad, didn't you get a stone lantern before? Can you light up this place with that?" "I can try to." Han Sun had already been thinking about making use of the stone lantern. But the stone lantern's lantern flame was different from the flame that adorned the long, bright lanterns around. He did not know if it would work, but he resolved to give it a go. Han Sun took the stone lantern out of Destiny's tower. The stone lantern was the same as before. The flame was about the size of a thumb. It was not very bright. Holding the stone lantern, Han Sun tiptoed closer to the darkness. Where the light shone, the darkness melted and fell back. It carved out a lit area. It really does work. Han Sun was extremely happy. He held the stone lantern and kept moving forward. Large amounts of darkness were chased away. The stone lantern did not look very bright, but in the dark, it was able to light up an area that was several dozen feet wide. In the radius of the stone lantern, the universal cogwheels returned to normal. They did not break again. It looks like this stone lantern is better than these long light lanterns. I do not know what this stone lantern is, but it is very weird. Han Sun stroked the stone lantern hard. He really loved it. A significant portion of the zone was lit up. It was not difficult to bring the goldfish family through with him. Han Sun held Bauer and sat atop the big goldfish's back. He enabled the big goldfish to lead them. Han Sun held the stone lantern to keep the area bright. The big goldfish's rabid powers did not advance any further, but the fish had not recovered either. It still seemed as if it had some clarity, even though its reaction was a bit slow. Fortunately, the fish was still able to understand Han Sun's words. It kept following Han Sun's direction. The small goldfish followed next to them. It seemed to be scared while venturing through the dark. While they were traveling, Han Sun thought he heard a woman wailing in the dark. It was a sorrowful sound, and it seemed rather close to them. The crying voice was more than spooky. It was very sad as it rang out from the silence. It made people feel a chill. "Dad, it looks like someone is crying," Bao said while looking into the dark area. "It does not matter. Just ignore it." Han's son continued to hold the lantern. He made the big goldfish carry on toward the next long, light lantern. The lantern was not too far away. It was just 120 to 150 feet away. But they had been traveling a few hundred miles. They had yet to reach the long, bright lantern. Han's son thought, "Sacred is so weird." When I walked past the long, bright lantern, both of the distances seemed 90 to 120 feet apart from each other. Even if there was a long, bright lantern missing, it would only be 210 to 240 feet away. Now we have walked a few hundred miles, and have yet to reach the next lantern. Clearly, there is some problem with the space in this area. The darkness around was suddenly filled with a countless number of sharp blades. They were headed for Han's son from every angle. Moon Shadow God. Han's son recognized who the black blades belonged to. "I will make you pay for my son's death." Moon Shadow God's angry voice sounded out from the dark. She was able to travel through the darkness, and she seemed to be able to control it. 2931 Death Angel Han's son frowned. His time area was instantly activated. The shadow blades, which had almost descended onto the big goldfish, were suddenly stopped. They were proceeding very slowly. Moon Shadow God could saw that her shadow blades weren't working, so she revealed herself from out of the darkness. She was floating behind the shadow blades. She looked at Han's son madly and said, "No matter how strong you are, you must die because of what you did to my son." Han's son coldly said, "Moon Shadow God, I pity you. I do not want to kill you. You should just go." "Go? Of course I will not go. If I cannot kill you, you are not going to escape." Moon Shadow God said something that did not make any sense. Her shadow blades quickly blended into the dark and disappeared. Han's son saw Moon Shadow God leave. He enabled the big goldfish to carry on leading the way. They did not travel for long when they saw a crack in the ground. It was unknown how wide the crack was, but the stone lantern's light could not reveal the other side of it. There was only darkness. Han's son looked deeper. It was just darkness. He did not know how deep the crack was. Han's son did not want to fly in that place. The danger meter was too high, so he looked to his left. He then looked to his right, and decided to walk along the left side of the crack. He wanted to see if he could go around it. He walked 10 miles, and the crack next to him had still not ended. It looked like a bottomless abyss. He did not know how far it went. Weird. Why do I not see Ancient Abyss Grandmaster and the others? Han's son frowned. Ancient Abyss Grandmaster had not arrived there too long before them. Yet all this way, he had not seen Ancient Abyss Grandmaster or his friends. That was not right. While he was thinking, Han's son's eyes froze. He saw a creature at the edge of the big crack. The creature was dressed in black armor. It was like European, medieval heavy armor. The creature was sitting at the edge of the crack. It lowered its head and peered into the crack. "My name is Han's son," Han's son said while looking at the armored creature. "I am just walking past here. I apologize if I am disturbing you. I hope you will not take offense." The armored creature gave no response. It just continued to sit where it was with its head lowered. "Is it dead?" Han's son used Dongxian aura to check the armored creature's presence. Who would have thought that when Dongxian aura touched down on the creature's armor, the black armor would suddenly shine? It displayed many light symbols across it. When the light symbols flickered, the area around was covered with the light symbol and a bysema. Han's son and the others were locked into that bysema. The armor's light symbol grew brighter. There was some air coming out of the armored creature. It looked like it was there, but it was not there. That air was so strong that it made Han's son feel scared. Han's son clutched the stone lantern and fell back. He threw a punch at the bysema, but the power he unleashed was repelled by it. It almost resulted in Han's son being thrown off the back of the big goldfish. "The Death Angel is activated. You are dead." Moon Shadow God was outside the bysema. She looked at Han's son with rage in her eyes. "Are you saying the Death Angel was your work?" Han's son looked at Moon Shadow God. "I would not dare touch the Death Angel," Moon Shadow God coldly said. "It was the work of Sacred Leader. It is a scary machine that guards the holy garden. I just played a trick to have you stumble into it. A machine? It has such a big life force. How can it be a machine? It is a living thing. Han's son looked at the armored creature in shock. That mysterious armored creature was now called a death angel. The life force of the being was very strong. It did not look like a machine at all. You do not know anything. Sacred Leader knows everything. You will never understand that. It is not just a living machine. If Sacred Leader wants to, he can turn a stone into a living thing. Moon Shadow God sounded angry. She went on to say, I just wish I could avenge the death of my son through my own hands. Why would you risk so much for that kind of son? Han's son sighed. No matter how bad he was my son. You killed him, so you have to pay. Moon Shadow God's expression looked a little conflicted, as she tried to force a look of true decision. Han's son wished to say something more, but he saw that the death angel's back was gleaming with light. Suddenly giant big light wings appeared. When the light wings spread, the death angel's body started to float. It was now facing Han Senator. The eye of the helmet had two light beams. They were like spotlights shining on Han Senator. The light symbols on the armor made it look half transparent. With the light wings, it made the death angel look like an angel descending to earth. That scary presence made people feel a chill. It was like if the death angel moved its light wings, space and darkness would instantly rip. Whoever comes to the holy garden, die. The death angel sounded emotionless. It was like a cold and emotionless machine. While it was talking, the death angel rose its right arm above its head. Its arm was like a blade rising. The flames were like they were blowing into the sky. It was like a burning flame slashing a skylight sword. And it was coming down on Han Sr. This place does not look like the holy garden. Han's son looked around. Aside from the big crack, all he saw were broken rocks. He did not see any buildings, and there was certainly no garden. Even though the garden was broken, he should have still been able to see the ruins of it. There was nothing of the sort anywhere to be seen. Upon hearing what Han's son said, the death angel appeared to be shocked. It lowered its head and thought, this cannot be a machine. It must be a creature. Han's son did not think the death angel was a machine. No machine was able to think the way it did. Moon Shadow God coldly laughed as she said, You are happy too soon. That big crack was supposed to be in the holy garden. Where you are standing is the entrance of the holy garden. Of course, the death angel only thought for a moment before saying, This place is the holy garden. You entered the holy garden, so you should die. After that, the death angel's armor carried a strong flame. It was headed toward Han Sr. Dad, let me do this. Han's son wanted to move, but Bauer suddenly spoke. She jumped off of his back. She was in the air. Her sunglasses flashed. Bauer's body started to change. She suddenly looked just like the death angel. The armor on her was very bright, and the light wings were big and white. Pang! Bauer raised her arm too. She was learning Death Angel's position of attack. Two powers collided in midair, which created a big explosion. It blew open the Death Angels by Sema. They actually tied, and neither of them was hurt. How is that possible? Who is this girl? How was she able to turn into the Death Angel? Moon Shadow God looked at Bauer. She was in shock. Han's son knew it was the power of the sunglasses. But the sunglasses could only morph a person into the shape of a creature. Once the creature was scanned, one could adopt the appearance of the creature. Then, one would also have the power of that creature. Unfortunately, the sunglasses scan speed was not fast. It required time, and the scanning changes required a lot of power and energy. It was not just limited by time. One was not able to change into anything one wanted to. There were a lot of limitations. Chapter 2932 Holy Garden. The sunglasses scan turned Bauer into the Death Angel. Most parts of her were the same as the Death Angel. The fight was very hard, so it was difficult to tell if either one of them was going to triumph before the end. Han's son did not watch Bauer and the Death Angel fight. He sat on the back of the big goldfish and held the stone lantern. He was holding his cause karma knife and slashing toward Moon Shadow God. Moon Shadow God wanted to retreat into the darkness. Han's son realized she was very nimble. but her moving distance with each evasion was very short. It was like she hadn't moved at all. The radius of the time area was very small. Unless the enemy was at a close distance, it was very difficult to restrict and restrain the movements of an opponent. Earlier, Moon Shadow God thought Han Sun would be killed by the Death Angel. There was also a Bysema to keep them apart. That was why she stood so close to Han Senator. Only the Bysema kept them apart. She wanted to watch Han Sun get killed at close range. But Bauer had turned into Death Angel. After hitting the Death Angel, the Bysema broke. Moon Shadow God was exposed, and directly in front of Han Senator time area was able to touch Moon Shadow God. Moon Shadow God could not move by much, but Han Sen's knife air hit Moon Shadow God like it was hitting a shadow. It went right through her image. He was unable to damage her. Han Sun slashed a few times, but it was the same result each time. He was not able to touch Moon Shadow God's body. Moon Shadow God coldly laughed and said, "Time area is such a strong power. How long are you going to last? When the time area disappears, it will be time for me to avenge the death of my son." "I am afraid you will never have that chance," Han Sun coldly replied. He put the stone lantern in front of him and brought out the shield of the Medusa's gaze. He activated Medusa's gaze. Two weird lights went through the flame, which was dyed white. When the gaze went toward Moon Shadow God, she was trapped by the time area. She was unable to move. She had to generate Moon Shadow power to fight it. Medusa's gaze, which had been boosted by the fire, froze Moon Shadow God's body. It made her freeze in the air. Medusa's gaze was a true god weapon, and it was reinforced by the lantern. Even a true god would not be able to block it. She was frozen. She was like a dead person. Han Sun ignored Moon Shadow God. He looked at Bauer, who was still fighting the Death Angel. He noticed Bauer had an advantage on the enemy, and she was able to keep suppressing the Death Angel. When the power and Geno arts were in the same situation, Bauer's power and Geno arts had the Han family legacy. Her timing and understanding of combat were impeccable. At the very least, it far exceeded the Death Angel. She was beating the Death Angel, which had the same level of power as her. Dong! Bauer was slashing on the Death Angel's chest. She cut open its chest armor. Han Sun noticed that the Death Angel's armor did not show flesh beyond. There was only white light. "It really isn't a living thing," Han Sun complimentarily said. "Everything Sacred Leader does is a bit beyond belief. I cannot believe he made such a powerful machine. If he was able to make many Death Angels, it would be easy for him to conquer the world." The Death Angel kept getting injured, but it refused to concede. It was like it did not know about pain or fear. It continued to fight Bauer. Catcha! The Death Angel's head was cut off by Han Senator. It didn't die though. The fire from its neck continued to burn, and it was still headed for Bauer. Bauer's body flashed. She slashed open the Death Angel's chest piece, revealing a white-colored crystal inside. Bauer flew right at her enemy. She grabbed hold of the crystal. Suddenly, the white light of the Death Angel's body was gone, which led to the armor crumbling into itself. "Dad!" Bauer flew back and returned to her true self. She looked very tired. It looked as if she had used the sunglasses too much. Han Sun quickly held her. Bauer was like a cat in Han Sen's arms. She looked super tired. She almost immediately fell asleep in Han Sen's arms. Han Sun rarely saw Bauer tired. He thought, using the sunglasses is quite the drain of energy. Even Bauer was unable to last long. He picked up the Death Angel's crystal, which was in Bauer's hands. There were a lot of sides to the crystal. The shape of it was rather oval. It was shiny on the inside, and it released a scary power. I wonder what this thing is made of. If there are no announcements for its killing, I presume it cannot be a xenogenic gene. Han Sun did not understand what the crystal was for, so he put it away. Han Sun was going to exit the area, but he suddenly thought about Moon Shadow God. Next to the big crack was the Death Angel, and the entrance to the Holy Garden. Han Sun thought, I do not know what sort of place the Holy Garden is. If Sacred Leader wanted the Death Angel to guard there, that means there must be something important worth guarding. If the Death Angel that guards the door is dead, maybe I should go into the garden and see what is there. Perhaps I will find something. He had entered Sacred to find Little Flower. He also wanted to learn more about Sacred. This was a very important place, so he had to explore it. Han's son was holding the stone lantern. He shone its light below the big crack. It was very dark. There did not seem to be a bottom. It was unknown how deep it was. Han's son held the stone lantern and carefully entered the crack. After he flew down for a short amount of time, he was able to confirm that there was no danger. He then allowed the big goldfish and little goldfish to fly in. Han's son held the still sleeping bower as he descended atop the big goldfish's back. It was pitch black down there, so Han's son did not dare allow the big goldfish to fly down too quickly. He went down slowly. After an hour, he saw something flicker down below. A long bright lantern. Han's son stared at it for a while. He suddenly noticed a door by the long bright lantern. He let the big goldfish go toward the long bright lantern. The closer he got to the long bright lantern, the more he used its light to highlight the stone door. The door was not as powerful as the sacred door. It was just a very small stone door. It looked like the entrance to a garden. After he got close enough, he saw the sign above the door which said, Holy Garden. The door was open, but it looked as if what lay beyond was not in ruins. The conditions of it were still quite good. As Han's son stood in front of the door, he could see the view beyond it. He saw the holy garden had many long bright lanterns there. They lit up the entire place. When Han's son had been above, he had not seen any lights. The holy garden had a pavilion and some buildings. There were fake mountains, flowers, and grass. It looked very elegant. The combat had not reached and destroyed that place. Its condition was remarkably fine. When Han's son looked at one of the pavilions, his expression changed. Someone was sitting in the pavilion. "2933 Pavilion. That person was facing away from Han's senator. He was leaning against the railing of the pavilion. It looked as if he was admiring the flowers and the grass around. My name is Han's son. Han's son said while squeezing his fists. I have wandered into this place by accident. If I have offended you, please forgive me. After his encounter with the death angel, Han's son did not dare use his Dongxian aura to peep into people in case something happened. In a hellhole like that, it was best for him not to do anything he was uncertain about. The person was still sitting where he was not doing anything. It was like he had not heard Han's senator Han's son shouted a few times, but the man did not respond. He thought it was weird, so he walked into the garden and asked, Are you in some kind of trouble? Do you require my help? He was in sacred. He was not going to walk around willy-nilly. He had to explore that holy garden. Han's son thought the holy garden's trees, flowers, grasses, and woods were special. When he looked closer, he realized they were just plants that could not have been any more ordinary. They were not even xenogenic plants. Han's son walked around to confirm that was the case. The holy garden was very elegant, but the things inside it were very normal. It was not like the secret garden Han's son's mind had been imagining all that time. Sacred leader made that scary thing, the death angel, to protect this place. How can it be so normal? Han's son looked at the man in the pavilion again. The man did not say anything. He just sat where he was leaning against the railing. He was admiring the view. He did not care for Han's son's presence there. Isn't it boring to just drink and watch flowers all alone? How about I provide you some company? Han's son walked to the pavilion. It was then he realized the person was a woman. The clothes she wore were quite loose, which was why Han's son had not realized it before. There was a stone table inside the pavilion. There was also a thing that looked like a stone pot. The pot was cooking meat, and the fire was burning. The soup inside the pot was bubbling. When he got closer, he was able to smell the aroma of the meat. It smelled good. Han's son could not help but start leaking saliva from his gaping mouth. Aside from that pot of meat, there was some wine. There were no cups. Being happy alone? Why not be happy together? We, a father and daughter who are meeting you, is surely an encounter that was destined to be. Why don't you and I share a drink? Han's son could see the woman was still not responding, so he left the big goldfish and little goldfish outside. He held bower and carefully entered the pavilion. The father and daughter both looked at the meat intently with their eyes. It was unknown what sort of meat it was, but it smelled delicious. Even Bower, who was asleep, was woken up by it. Traveling all that way had cost a lot of energy. They had been fighting for a long time. Their bellies were a bit empty. Facing all that meat, she could not hold it. Although the father and daughter wanted to eat the meat, they were not the owners of the upcoming dish. They would not just boldly eat it, but the woman was still not talking. Han Sen faced Bao away from the stuff. They turned toward the woman, wanting to learn more about who she was. When Han Sen saw her front side, he immediately took notice of her face. He could not help but utter, "Arg." He looked confused. The woman was not alive. It was just a statue, but the statue seemed to be very real. It was like it was alive. It was wearing ordinary clothing. If one did not see its face, one would not tell it was a statue. It wasn't because the woman was a statue that Han Sen was shocked. It was because the statue's face looked like the blonde Wanner. It was totally in the shape of Wanner. Sacred Leader's holy garden has a statue of Wanner. Does that mean Wanner is related to Sacred Leader? Does that mean Wanner's brother is Sacred Leader? Han Sen looked at the statue in shock. He thought of many things. He looked at the Wanner statue and saw her holding a cup. The cup still had wine in it. He could smell it. Wait a minute. Han Sen's heart suddenly jumped. The wine cup was a part of the statue, but the wine was on the table and meat was cooking. The water in the pot kept bubbling. This is not right. If it is just a statue, where did the wine and meat come from? Is someone already here in the holy garden? Did he put down the wine and the meat here? Han Sen looked around and used his Dongxian aura. The name of the holy garden was famous, but the actual place was not very big. Han Sen saw through everything. With the Dongxian aura, not a portion of the place was missing. He did not spot a life force there. Did the people who come here notice we were here and left via the back door? Han Sen wondered. Bao ran in front of the stone table and took a seat atop one of the stone chairs. She pulled a spoon out of nowhere, put it into the pot, and started eating the meat. It tastes so good. Bao bit into the meat. She looked very happy. It seemed to be very good. Han Sen was going to eat some as well. He sat down in front of the stone table. Bao used her spoons to pick up meat from the pot and bring it up to Han Sen's mouth. She said, "Dad, you should try it. It tastes so good. This is so much better than the food Mom makes. Let me try some." Han Sen knew that Bao loved to eat, but she would not eat just anything. If there was an issue with a meal, Bao would be the first to raise a complaint. Thus, Han Sen did not have to worry about there being a problem with the food. Han Sen took a bite of the meat with the spoon. It tasted very tender. It was fatty, but it was not greasy. It melted yet was crispy. It really is not bad. Han Sen had to compliment it too. This was the first time Han Sen had eaten meat this good. Deified Gene 1. While Han Sen was complimenting it, he suddenly heard the sounds of his genes increasing. Holy shit! Does the pot contain meat of a creature that was true God class? Who was this generous to cook some true God class xenogenic meat and just leave it here? Han Sen did not feel this was right. Even powerful people like Very High Leader and Sky Palace Leader would not have been this lavish. They would not cook true God xenogenic meat and just hand it out to people. Even if they were going to leave, they would take the meat. Han Sen used his Dongxian aura to have a look around. He had yet to find anything else. Aside from them, there was only the statue of Wanner in the garden. Bao did not mind. She kept eating the meat and drinking the wine. The wine was her beverage. Han Sen did not see any danger in it. Although it was weird that the meat could increase his deified genes, it was a good thing for him. The black dragon's body was too big. Han Sen was worried about how long it would take for him to earn a deified gene after killing it. Thanks to this pot of meat, however, all he needed was to take one bite for a whole deified gene. This was perfect for him. Chapter 29:34 Meat in the pot. Han Sen saw Bao was biting the meat and drinking the wine. Her face was full of food and wine stains, so he said, "Save me 2 pieces. I will keep this big piece for you, Dad." Bao picked up a big chunk of meat and raised it to Han Sen's mouth. "Bao, you are a nice child." Han Sen used his hands to accept the meat. It smelled so delicious that Han Sen almost bit his tongue off. "Dad, you should drink some wine. It tastes so good too." Bao put the wine bottle next to Han Sen's mouth. Han Sen had a sip. He felt it erupt in his mouth like a spring. It was very sweet. The wine was not excellent, but it was more than suitable to enjoy with a good meal. Han Sen's head made an announcement. Deified gene +1. Holy shit! Can this wine increase my deified genes too? Han Sen was shocked. After he ate the piece of meat, there hadn't been that announcement. Now that he had taken a sip of the wine, he received the announcement. That wine was something special. I leveled up. It really did make me level up. Han Sen was very happy. The father and daughter merrily drank their wine and ate their meat. Not long later, they had consumed all of the meat in the pot and the wine in the bottle. Bauer picked up the whole stone pot and drank the leftover soup in one large gulp without stopping. She pulled out her tongue and licked up all the remaining juices that had messed up her face. It looked as if she wanted more. Although Han Sen had not eaten enough, his deified genes had already reached the max. There was no need for him to be greedy. Han Sen felt quite satisfied as he sat against the railing. Bauer was holding her full belly and leaning next to him. The father and the daughter both looked satisfied. This wine and meat were really good, but I do not know how to make it myself, Han Sen said. If I could, I would make it myself. We could eat it every day. If I can eat meat that nice and drink such nice wine every day here, I would be willing to stay here forever. Bauer looked very hopeful for that to come true. There is no rush. I remember the taste, Han Sen said. When we go back, we can try to replicate it in our kitchen. I can get that same taste back. He thought that even if one chef could not replicate that taste, he could surely get the best chef in the alliance to bring back that same taste. Yes, and I am going to eat meat and drink wine every day. She was really happy about the prospect. Han Sen was thinking about the good life to come. The father and daughter were sitting against the rail thinking about the future days of eating meat and drinking wine. At the same time, they were resting. They did not know what they might encounter later, and there was no telling if they would receive another moment of rest. It was very rare to find a safe place like that. It was a good thing for them to gain as much energy as they could before hitting the road again. That was especially true for Bauer. The sunglasses had cost her so much energy to use. It was good for her to be able to take a break. After she ate the meat, she seemed to be in a much better condition and have a lot more energy. She did not look as tired as before. Han Sen closed his eyes while he leaned against the rail. Bauer was sleeping against Han Sen's legs. She was rubbing her belly. She seemed to be very full. The big goldfish and small goldfish had been waiting outside the pavilion the entire time. Although the small goldfish loved to eat a lot of food, the stone pot was too small to share with everyone. Besides, there was only one pot of food. Bauer and Han Sen had eaten it all, but it was still not enough. The big goldfish had a big head. If it gave some to the small goldfish, it would not have been enough to fill its belly. Thus Han Sen did not give it anything. Suddenly, Han Sen's nose smelled another nice meat. He thought, this meat really is excellent. We finished it so long ago, but the smell as aroma is still there. It did not take long for Han Sen's expression to change. He heard the distinct sound of water boiling. Although it was quiet, it was certainly there. Han Sen opened his eyes wide and looked at the stone pot atop the stone table. He saw that the stone pot, which Bauer had completely drunk all the soup out of, had another tub of meat. Another pot of meat! Bauer was as much shocked as she was happy. She stared at the meat inside the pot. Han Sen was not as happy. Although this was not very normal, the stone pot was right next to them. How could there be another pot of meat? Han Sen's heart jumped. He quickly picked up the wine from the table. His expression changed again. Of course, the wine bottle that the father and the daughter had been drinking out of had more wine in it. What is this? Han Sen used his Dongxian aura to scan the holy garden a few times. He had yet to learn anything. Han Sen's vision landed on Wanner's jade statue. She was still sitting there in the same position. She looked at the garden outside as she held the wine cup. There had been no changes. This is so weird. Who is able to do this without me seeing? Han Sen frowned but did not speak. Bauer was already in front of the stone table collecting more meat to munch on. Han Sen wanted to stop Bauer and ask her not to eat yet, but he heard a familiar voice sound from the holy garden's entrance. Han Sen, why are you here? Hansen saw a person walk into the holy garden. Hansen turned his head. The person who had come to the holy garden was one of the extreme king deified elites that followed Ancient Abyss. His name was Yang Yinsheng. Why are you here? Where is Ancient Abyss Grandmaster? Hansen looked at Yang Yinsheng with confusion. There was no one else out there. Yang Yinsheng looked bitter as he said, I do not want to talk about it. The Grandmaster brought us into the darkness. We thought we could reach the long, bright lantern ahead, but we walked a few hundred miles only to remain in the darkness. We then heard something get closer in the dark. Something attacked the shining umbrella. The Grandmaster allowed us to keep the umbrella and proceed while he ran out of the umbrella's safety to confront the enemy. Hansen did not speak. He knew something else must have happened. Otherwise, Yang Yinsheng would not have come there alone. Yang Yinsheng went on to say, the four of us were holding the shining umbrella as we kept going for the light. We did not get very far before something else sought to attack the shining umbrella. After a few hits, the shining umbrella was destroyed. I did not see what the monster looked like, but I was hit away by it. I fell into the darkness and kept on falling. It was like I was plummeting into an abyss. The power of that darkness was like a grinding machine. I tried my hardest, but I could not block it. Even the protective treasures have been broken. As I was thinking about how I was going to die, I landed in a place with a long, bright lantern. I stood inside the lantern's glow to survive. With the long, bright lantern there, the creatures of the dark did not show up again. Even so, I could feel something watching me in the dark. It did not dare enter the light though. As he spoke, Yang Yinsheng felt a chill. He looked outside the holy garden and could still feel a monster watching him. Chapter 2935 Holy Garden Phi. Did the long, bright lanterns lead you here? Hansen asked. No, there was only one long, bright lantern, Yang Yinsheng said. Around it was all dark. I thought I was going to die down there, but something weird happened. What weird thing? Hansen looked at him with interest. Yang Yinsheng had a wry smile as he said, in the dark, I heard a woman crying. A woman crying? Hansen was shocked. He himself had heard a woman crying once before. But then Moon Shadow God appeared. Hansen believed it to be Moon Shadow God's voice. Now with Yang Yinsheng having heard the crying sound too, it was weird. Yang Yinsheng said, you will probably laugh when I tell you this, but at the time I was trapped there and feeling hopeless. Hearing the crying sound actually made me incredibly angry. I thought I was going to die anyway, but if I was going to be trapped and die, I preferred dying quickly. So I ran toward the crying sound. I was going to fight that thing in the dark, without caring about whether I lived or died. It was so strange. I thought I was going to be killed in the dark. I chased the crying noises with the dark power still around me, but it was not as strong as before. My power was able to withstand the oppression of the dark. As I went, I stumbled across here in one long bright lantern. When I arrived here, the sound of the woman crying was gone. Yang Yinsheng tried to explain what had happened to him. Was Yang Yinsheng following Moon Shadow God to get here? No way. Moon Shadow God was above the crack. If Yang Yinsheng had chased Moon Shadow God, he would be above the crack as well. He also would have reached here a long time ago. He wouldn't have just arrived now. Hansen looked at Yang Yinsheng and asked, when was the last time you heard the woman cry? Not long ago, Yang Yinsheng replied. Hansen thought, that cannot be right. It seems like the woman crying wasn't Moon Shadow God. While they were talking, the sound of a woman crying was suddenly heard again outside the holy garden. It sounded as if it was there, but it wasn't there. It sounded very depressed. The sobbing almost made one's head itch. Here it comes again, Yang Yinsheng said. It's that sound. Hansen looked outside the holy garden. The two long, bright lanterns outside the door were not very illuminated. Outside the garden was pretty much just darkness. One was not able to see anything. Everyone held their breaths for a while. Eventually, the crying sound disappeared. It was like the crying person had walked away. Yang Yinsheng pointed at the meat in the stone pot and said, did you guys make this meat? Can I have some? I do not want to starve to death. That place was quite scary, so he felt as if he could die any second. Therefore, he did not mind eating something. The meat is mine. Bauer jumped in front of the stone table and used her hands to protect the stone pot. Han Sen wished to say something, but he heard someone else coming from outside the holy garden. Someone else had arrived. They saw an old man wearing a gold robe walk into the holy garden. It was 9,000 King. This is the holy garden. You outsiders cannot just enter here. 9,000 King looked at Han Sen and the others. He looked angry. He was checking out Han Sen and the others as if to discover something. Yang Yunsheng looked fairly worried. They had just come to a place that was a bit safer and not life-threatening. Yet it was where they again met 9,000 King. Yang Yunsheng knew 9,000 King was not as nice as Han Senator 9,000 King. Quickly looked at the stone pot and Wanner's statue inside the pavilion. He looked excited, but it was just for one moment. It could not escape Han Sen's eye though. Are you not going to walk away? Do you want to die? 9,000 King stared at Han Sen and walked closer to the pavilion. His body had dark gold markings on it. He looked strange. It was as if many weird centipedes were surrounding him. Han Sen did not speak. He stood in front of the pavilion and did not do anything. Yang Yunsheng was scared. Although he was a butterfly deified elite, 9,000 King was an old monster who hailed from Sacred's era. One was not able to tell how much he had evolved in all that time. He could have been one of the top true gods in existence. No matter, he was not able to beat him. Seeing 9,000 King approaching, Yang Yunsheng appeared as if he was facing off a big enemy. 9,000 King did not even look at him. He looked at Han Sen, showing no care for him. 9,000 King's body was becoming stronger. From what Yang Yunsheng saw, it was like a giant monster that could break the sky and could not be beaten. He thought 9,000 King was going to perform a strong attack on Han Senator instead. 9,000 King walked right before the pavilion without making an attack. He used his power to suppress Han Sen and the others. He said, I am afraid to damage the leader's legacy. Do not make me break anything. Bauer laughed out loud and said, You are just afraid of my father hurting you. You make it sound so nice. 9,000 King's face did not move. He coldly laughed and said, I have traveled across the universe following sacred leader and slaughtering countless true gods. Your ancestors at the time were probably drinking milk from nowhere. Killing you guys will be easy. I just want to earn some karma by letting you go. Do not misunderstand. Han Sen smiled at 9,000 King, but he did not speak. Bauer ignored 9,000 King too. She used her spoon to pick up more meat from the stone pot. Stop! 9,000 King's expression changed. He madly shouted and rushed toward the stone pavilion. He reached his hands out at Bauer. The air on his body turned into the aura of a dark gold centipede. He was coming for her. Han Sen jumped before the pavilion, clutching the shield of the Medusa's gaze. He activated Medusa's gaze. A weird light shone against the dark gold centipede air. It trapped them all in the air. Freezing skills are strong, but to me the king, they are trifling tricks and nothing more. 9,000 King's eyes looked cold as he drew a blade from his waist. The sword looked extremely weird. Han Sen had seen many rare swords before, but he had never seen a sword this weird. The sword was 2 fingers wide and 4 feet long. It looked to have been crafted from blood jade. The weirdest thing was that the sword had eyes. From the tip to the handle, there were some weird eyes all across it. Some of them were open. Some of them were shut. Some of them were half open. They all looked different from each other. They all lined up and looked extremely weird and disgusting. They made people feel very uncomfortable. It gave people goosebumps. 9,000 King said, 9 eyes go through 1,000 ancients. 1 sword slashes the underworld. Under my 9-eyed sword, nothing can survive. I, the king, believe in good morals. I was going to let you guys go, but if you guys want to die, then it is not my fault. He then raised the 9-eyed sword. Chapter 29:36 3 questions 9,000 King raised his jade sword. The 9 eyes on the sword were all open. The pupils flickered, emitting some evil light. One easily saw it spread. The Medusa's gaze touched the lights from the eyes on the sword. It was as if it had been hypnotized. The once open eyes shut. No matter how many times or ways Han Sun tried to make use of Medusa's gaze, Medusa's eyes would not open. The scariest thing was that Han Sun slowly noticed that his own eyes were shutting too. It was as if he was becoming extremely tired. He was not able to open his eyes anymore. No matter how much he struggled and tried to open his eyes, nothing seemed to work. His eyelids refused to open. They just wanted to close. Stop resisting. It is useless. The sword lights of the nine-eyed sword can rob the vision of every being in this universe. When facing the nine-eyed sword, no creature has an eye. 9,000 King raised his nine-eyed sword. He looked evil as he said, "It is not just that either. When you see the eyes on the nine-eyed sword, you are almost dead." As Han Sun listened to 9,000 King's voice, he was still unable to open his eyes. They were closing completely. He felt as if something was moving in his eyes. It felt as if it was going to blow up his eyeballs and emerge. "Arg!" Yang Yinsheng screamed. He held his eyes and screamed like crazy. Somehow his eyes exploded. They had become two gaping and bloody holes. "I gave you the chance to leave, but you did not want to." 9,000 King coldly looked at Yang Yinsheng. He then turned his gaze toward Han Senator. He was hoping to see the moment Han Sen's eyes exploded. Han Sun felt like all of the blood in his body going toward his eyes, preparing to pop them out. He knew the nine-eyed sword was weird, but he had no idea he was actually being dealt damage by it. The big goldfish and small goldfish kept their eyes closed. Their eyes were swollen like balloons with a maximum amount of air put into them. They were going to blow up any second. Although Han Sun could not see, in the Dongxian Sutra, he still felt everything. The only person who had not been affected was Bauer, who happened to be wearing her sunglasses. 9,000 King coldly looked at Han Senator. He was waiting for Han Sen's eyes to explode. The nine-eyed sword power not only exploded eyes. When the eyes exploded, all blood and the life force would seep out of that wound until the person was a dried husk. The person would be dead. Feeling that his eyes about to blow up, Han Sun suddenly pulled the string of the dog crow bow. He fired an arrow at the nine-eyed sword. 9,000 King immediately saw his action. He swung his nine-eyed sword at the teeth arrow that was coming toward him. The dog crow bow was very famous, but that was only when it was in Crow Sky Dog's hands. In ordinary people's hands, 9,000 King did not really care. 9,000 King knew Crow Sky Dog very well. He knew the dog crow bow's power very well too. Dong! It traveled through space. The teeth arrow behaved as it teleported. The nine-eyed sword slashed it away. It did not harm 9,000 King in the least. In the next second, Han Sen's body weirdly appeared behind 9,000 King. He swung his knife toward 9,000 King. 9,000 King's expression changed. Han Sun teleported quickly, faster than he could have possibly imagined. It was too late for him to evade, so he waved the nine-eyed sword to block Han Sen's knife. How is that possible? When the knife and sword collided, his nine-eyed sword was broken by Han Senator. The nine-eyed sword was dead, and the lights were extinguished. When the nine-eyed sword was broken, Han Sen's knife light was still going toward 9,000 King's back. Dong! A metallic sound rang out. Han Sun had cut open the gold robe. Inside the gold robe, there was a dark green armor. Han Sen's slash was able to break the nine-eyed sword, but it did not leave a mark on the dark green armor. 9,000 King waved his right arm. It struck Han Sen's cause karma knife. It made Han Sun and his knife fly back. Han Sen's body hit the pillar of the pavilion. The stone pillar looked ordinary. Once he hit it, Han Sun was unable to break it. He bounced back onto the floor. Blood was pouring out of his mouth. The blood inside his chest was thrashing around like a stormy sea. God personality armament? Han Sun stood back up. He stared at the dark green armor inside the gold robe. You have good eyesight. 9,000 King ripped off his gold robe. He revealed the splendor of his dark green armor. Aside from his head and neck, every inch of him was covered in the dark green armor. The dark green armor was tightly wound around the body. It looked very powerful. There was a small gap on the plate of the armor. Han Sun looked closer. He saw a closed eye. It made people feel a chill. This is the God Personality Armament Thousand-Eye Battle Armor. This nine-eyed sword was just one of the toys I built to try and copy the Thousand-Eye Battle Armor. The power it has is not half as strong as the 1,000-eye battle armor. 9,000 King looked very menacing as he said, "Since you have seen my 1,000-eye battle armor, I will not let you live anymore. It is too late now, even if you want to live and leave." Han Sun did not budge an inch. He held the cause karma knife and coldly said, "You can put your god personality armament 1,000-eye battle armor to the test. See if it can kill me." 9,000 King frowned. He looked at the godless fights before. He knew the power of the cause karma knife. He had learned the power of the cause karma knife. The nine-eyed sword's damage to Han Sun had been completely absorbed. The cause karma knife was much stronger than 9,000 King had imagined. If I cannot kill him with one hit, it will be annoying to have him use the cause karma knife power, 9,000 King thought. Han Sun suddenly said, 9,000 King, what you want is the item in the pavilion. We don't have to keep fighting. If you can answer me a few questions, I can give you the treasure inside this pavilion. Are you serious? 9,000 King looked at Han Sun with curiosity. He had not expected Han Sun to say something like that. I am serious, Han Sun said. If you cannot answer me, then it does not count. If you deliberately give me questions that I don't know the answer to, how am I supposed to answer you? 9,000 King coldly laughed. If you are here for the treasure in the pavilion, you must know what it is, Han Sun said. If I answer the question, will you give me the item? 9,000 King did not answer the question. He coldly smiled at Han Sr. That is one of the questions. I will only ask you a few questions. Han Sun did not hesitate. He spoke straightforwardly. What questions? Let me hear them first. 9,000 King's eyes shone. He was not in a rush. That was the first question. I have 4 other questions to ask. Who is the lady depicted in the statue? What is her relationship with Sacred Leader? How many elites are there in Sacred? And where are they? Han Sun asked all he wanted to know. Chapter 2937 Sacred Leader's sister. 9,000 King's eyes were shining. It was unknown what he was thinking about. He went silent for a while before saying, "These questions you ask are all related to Sacred Leader. They are all secrets. Even the 10 generals would not know the answers to all of them. Does that mean you are not willing to conduct a trade with me?" Han Sun coldly asked. "It is not like that. I know some of these secrets. If I tell you, and you are not satisfied, what will happen then?" 9,000 King's eyes looking shiny. "If it comes to that, we will resume our combat." Han Sun lifted his lips. 9,000 King was scary, and he had a god personality armament. In this universe, he was a top-class elite. He could not change his mind. He could not deny the fact he was a slave. He was not kind and he was very stingy. He would not take any loss. 9,000 King's personality was very suspicious. Seeing Han Sun so determined made him worry even more. He was not going to attack just yet. 9,000 King thought. Although this Han Sun is only butterfly class, the treasure and geno arts of his body are very weird. He has a geno art that can make a true god level down. He hasn't used it yet. He looks so calm. Is he so confident he can destroy my 1,000-eye battle armor? It had to be said that in the Geno godless fights, Han Sun had become famous in the whole universe. Many antique elites were afraid of Han Sen's Xian Yellow Sutra. 9,000 King laughed weirdly and said, "This place is the leader's deer garden. It is bad to destroy it. Fine, I can answer these questions you have asked. If you still aren't going to behave after I tell you the secrets, you cannot take it out on me for attacking you." When Han Sun heard 9,000 King say that, he did not feel weird. He casually said, "If you are not going to answer me some random thing, I can give you the treasure inside." When Han Sun said that, he was actually thinking, this holy garden is so weird. The meat we just ate reappeared in the pot. The wine we drank is back in the bottle. That is so weird. In fact, what shocked Han Sun the most was when he saw his deified genes. He noticed that after eating the meat in the pot, which filled up his deified genes, he was missing the 6 he required again. He returned to how he was before he ate the meat. That was not normal. If he could not figure out what was going on, Han Sun was not going to feel safe about it. Plus, there were other important questions. These were questions that had been on Han Sen's mind for a long time. 9000 King went silent a bit. He pointed at the stone pot and said, "This stone pot is the item sacred leader used to eat from. It is not some famous treasure, but it has a treasure that not even true God-class elites have. If you put the flesh of a xenogeniac inside to cook, it can turn the xenogeniac genes into a sort of power we can absorb. It can make creatures evolve easier than if they were to consume a vat of genofluid." Just that. Han Sen looked at 9000 King. 9000 King laughed and said, "It is just a dining apparatus. It is not bad for it to have that function. What makes it important is the meat in the pot. If I have seen it right, inside this pot is the flesh of one of the 4 holy beasts. It is Holy Kirin's xenogeniac genes." "What? That is the flesh of the Holy Kirin inside the pot?" Han Sen was shocked. He did not rightly believe the claim. "Yes, it is the Holy Kirin's flesh," 9000 King confidently said. "No way. I have been to East Holy Kirin Garden. Holy Kirin's flesh is there in the garden, and the flesh of the Kirin is bad. How are you able to cook it?" Han Sen frowned. He thought 9000 King was trying to trick him. Upon hearing Han Sen say that the Holy Kirin's flesh was inside the East Holy Kirin Garden, 9000 King was just as much shocked. He thought for a moment and said, "I did not expect the Holy Kirin to survive the disaster, but don't worry. Listen to me, and you will know that I am not lying." "I am listening," Han Sen said. 9000 King looked at the pavilion statue, which looked like Wanner, and said, "This thing is related to your second question. It is related to the owner of the statue." "Oh, who is this person depicted in the statue?" Han Sen asked. "The person in the statue is the leader's little sister," 9000 King said. "In regard to her name, I do not know the answer to that. If it is Sacred Leader's sister, she must be someone special within the ranks of Sacred. How can you not know her name?" Han Sen really didn't believe it. 9000 King sighed and said, "The leader really loved his little sister. Her body was always very weak. Sacred Leader was worried someone might hurt her, so he placed her in the Holy Garden to allow the Death Angel to protect her. Even the 10 generals of the 4 holy beasts were unable to gain access. No one really knew Sacred Leader had a little sister. The leader was really nice to his little sister. No matter what she requested, even if it was the head of a god, she would get it. He would do anything to ensure a smile would adorn his sister's face. The only reason I know about her is because she snuck out of the Holy Garden. She happened to bump into me. She said she wanted to walk around, but then something happened. That is why I know her. Regarding her name, I did not dare ask her for it." "I see," Han Sen said. "What was her connection to the meat in the pot?" 9000 King sighed and said, "Our leader was very nice to this little sister, but she was sick. She could not live for long. Our king tried his best, but she could not keep on living. The time she snuck out of the Holy Garden, Sacred Leader immediately knew. He followed her and showed up when she passed out. He took her away and put her back." "What did he say?" Han Sen asked. "Our leader said it seemed like only the flesh of the Holy Kirin would extend her life. But even that was for only a few years." 9000 King looked at the flesh that was bubbling in the stone pot. He went on to say, "God knows how many years have gone by, but ever since then, the meat has still been cooking. Meat that can be cooked inside a stone pot for so long must be something special. That is why I presumed it to be the flesh of the Holy Kirin." After Han Sen heard that, he thought, that means Wanner really is Sacred Leader's little sister. If that is true, why did she end up in a tree hole? In the Sacred Era, her lifespan was almost all gone. She required the flesh of the Holy Kirin to extend her life by a few years. It has been billions of years since then. She is still alive. What is that all about? And then? Han Sen asked. "There is no more. I only saw her once. I never saw her after that. Ever since then, Sacred started to have many problems." Not many years later, there were many big changes. I was on a business trip for the leader, which is how I survived. As to what happened in Sacred, I have no idea. 9000 King shook his head. 2938 Sacred Leader, that cannot be replaced. Han Sun looked at 9000 King and asked, "If you don't know what happened to Sacred in the past, how were you able to answer my last question?" 9000 King coldly laughed. "I actually don't know how many scary existences still remain with Sacred. If they are still alive, they will be in that place. Only by being there could they stay out of the fight." Han Sun looked at 9000 King and did not say anything. If Sacred really did have such a place, even a scary fight like that could not be held at bay. If so, Sacred would not have disappeared down the river of time. 9000 King had an expression that implied he understood what Han Sun was thinking. He coldly laughed. "This place is where the Sacred people lived. Even God's spirits cannot access that place. For Sacred to rule the whole world and kill countless God spirits, and remain standing for billions of years, it was all because of that palace. Even God spirits could do nothing more than look at it. If the elites in Sacred were still there back then, they would be in that palace even now." The race called Sacred, aside from Sacred Leader and his sister, who else is still there? Han Sun asked. "I have answered your questions," 9000 King said. "You still have not told me where the Sacred Palace is, so you have not answered me," Han Sun said. "Right now Sacred is already like this. It is already messed up. How am I supposed to know where the palace is?" 9000 King coldly grunted. "That means you did not really answer all of my questions, so it does not matter if you answered any of them." Han Sun frowned. "Do you want to break your promise to me?" 9000 King's face grew dim. "Indeed I am. You don't know if the flesh is truly Holy Kiran's. You don't know the name of Sacred Leader's sister. And you don't know where the race palace is. What is the point of you giving me useless answers?" Han Sun and 9000 King had a staring contest. Neither of them relented. "It looks like you weren't committed to upholding the promise whatsoever." 9000 King was a bit angry. The eye of the dark green armor was starting to open. The outline of the eye was glowing with a weird green light. "It is not like that. The answers you gave me are useless. I am sure you are aware of that. How about this? If you answer a question about Sacred, then this is yours." Han Sun pointed at the pavilion while he spoke. 9000 King's eyes were flickering. He looked murderous. He stared at Han Sun for a while and coldly said, "If I answer this question and you're still yanking my chain, even at the risk of destroying this garden, I am going to mop the floor with you." "We crystallizers keep our promises," Han Sun said. "All you have to do is answer me. The Sacred race only has Sacred Leader. There was nobody else. Are you happy now?" 9000 King walked toward the pavilion. "Hang on. That's not right," Han Sun said as he stopped 9000 King's advance. "Sacred Leader had a little sister. How can the Sacred race only have one person? Your answer is hilariously fake." "Who said Sacred Leader's little sister was from the Sacred race?" 9000 King coldly laughed before saying, "Sacred Leader is a unique existence in this universe. The sole being of his kind. Another does not exist that can be considered a part of the Sacred race. What you say is very contradicting. Is that lady not Sacred Leader's biological sister?" Han Sun frowned. He looked at 9000 King's face, but it did not seem as if he was lying. If he was going to lie, he could easily lie about how many people were in Sacred. He could have made up names and numbers, because Han Sun had no way of verifying the information. Instead, he had given Han Sun that strange answer. She was his biological sister, but the Sacred race only had Sacred Leader. That is all I know, believe it or not. 9000 King did not say anything more. He approached the stone pavilion. If Han Sun was going to stop him, he was just going to fight. "I will keep my word. The thing in the pavilion is now yours." Han Sun picked up Bauer and left the stone pavilion. The nine-eyed sword was broken. The power affecting the eyes of the big and small goldfish and Yang Yun Sheng was now gone. They were no longer damaged, but Yang Yun Sheng's eyes, which had exploded, could not be recovered. Han Sun was not an enemy of Yang Yun Sheng. Since he had a grudge against the Extreme King, he was not going to fix him. They left the pavilion and watched 9000 King enter it. Han Sun wasn't leaving the pavilion because he wanted to keep his promise. It was because the stone pot was too weird. He and Bauer had eaten all the meat inside it, but more meat had appeared. Han Sen's deified genes had increased for a time, but that progress had been removed. It was hard to believe, so Han Sen wanted to see how 9,000 King dealt with it. At that point maybe he could fight him. Han Sen only said he would let 9,000 King take the treasure. He never made a promise not to rob him. Upon seeing Han Sen leave, 9,000 King looked happy. He did not want to fight Han Senator, it was good for them to avoid a battle. 9,000 King walked in front of the stone pot, and reached out his hand. A chunk of meat from the pot went flying out of the water, and into his hands. It really is the flesh of the Holy Kirin. 9,000 King examined it. He excitedly swallowed it. After he ate it, 9,000 King's eyes turned bright. It looked as if he had received some benefits from it. Suddenly, 9,000 King opened his mouth. He faced the stone pot. The meat and soup in the stone pot all went flying into his fat gob. 9,000 King ate it all within a few seconds. Ha! Ha! The Holy Kirin's blood really is legendary. 9,000 King was cackling. Clearly, that pot of meat had provided him many benefits. Han Sen was just watching. He did not see anything strange. 9,000 King had eaten it all the same way he did. He had merely just done it faster. You guys, since you kept your promise, are okay. I will let you go for now. 9,000 King left the pavilion. He was going toward the Holy Garden's back door. He was going to explore the Holy Garden. They watched 9,000 King reach the back door. He opened it and left the place. Han Sen ignored 9,000 King and looked at the stone pot on the table. He wanted to see if the meat in the pot appeared again. Han Sen heard suddenly some footsteps from the Holy Garden's gate. He frowned and asked, "Who is coming now?" When Han Sen turned his head to take a look, he was frozen. The person who emerged from the Holy Garden's gate was 9,000 King, who had just left via the back door. "Why are you back again?" Han Sen asked with confusion. The back door and front door should not have been connected. It was unknown how he had come back so soon. 9,000 King was confused too. Weird. I left through the back door. Why have I come in from the front door? Han Sen was shocked by his words. He went to look at the stone pot. He immediately had goosebumps. Within the blink of an eye, the meat and soup that 9,000 King just ate had returned. He saw the pot was boiling with the meat inside. It smelled really good. That scene was supposed to be a delicious one. But Han Sen only felt an icy chill. What is going on here? Han Sen was confused. Chapter 2939 Space Cycle 9,000 King saw Han Sen observing the stone pot. He looked at it too. After seeing the meat in the pot, his expression changed. He ran over to the stone pavilion and stared at the meat that had returned to the stone pot. The more he looked at it, the worse 9,000 King's face appeared. After a while, he suddenly turned around and looked at Han Senator. He asked, "Did you guys eat the meat in the stone pot too?" Han Sen nodded, but he did not say anything. After 9,000 King confirmed that, his expression grew even direr. He did not say anything. He quickly ran to the Holy Garden's gate and ran out. Once 9,000 King ran out, he immediately returned at the back door. He looked at Han Senator. Han Sen saw that 9,000 King's expression was glum. It almost looked like he was going to cry. Damn it! I should have known that the Holy Garden was not a fine place to visit, 9,000 King madly said. Han Sen picked up Bauer and walked out of the Holy Garden's gate. After walking out of the Holy Garden's primary gate, he noticed it was not the entrance they had come in from. They were still in the Holy Garden. Behind them was the Holy Garden's back door. Han Sen frowned. 9,000 King was furious. He waved his hands to unleash a horizontal shockwave. It cut most of the grass and flowers in the garden. It was like he was a chef slicing and dicing chives. Shredded grass and broken flowers were everywhere. 9,000 King's eyes suddenly opened wide as he observed the ruined garden. Han Sen knew what 9,000 King wanted to do. He looked at the shredded grass and broken flowers in the garden. It was not long before a weird scene occurred. The whole garden returned to normal right under their noses. All of the grass and flowers, trees, and wood returned to normal. It was like it had never been damaged. It all happened within a second. Han Sen and the others watched as it happened, but they were unable to figure out how or why it was happening. The feeling was like watching a movie get trimmed. It was a ruined garden. After its trim, it connected with the perfect garden. The ruined garden suddenly became perfect and immaculate again. Damn it! It is a time cycle. 9000 King's face looked even worse. His god personality armament's eye opened. Seeing him from afar, 9000 King looked like a monster with green eyes all over him. The evil eyes were flickering with green lights. They covered 9000 King's entire body. BZT. The eyes on the armor unleashed some scary power. It made 9000 King's body tear space. It was headed for space. In the next second, Han-sun and the others saw 9000 King come out of the other side of space. He was still inside the garden. Oh no! Oh no! It is sacred power! It is Mr. Sacred Leader's sacred power. 9000 Kings looked frightened. His body started to shiver and shake. He looked to be very afraid. Upon hearing 9000 King's words, Han-sun suddenly thought of something. While he was in the Geno being scroll fights, Little Flower used the name Sacred to join the fight. It looked like he used powers that could control time and space. Han-sun did not witness it personally, but he had heard about it. It was a power that was similar to Sacred Leader. The power Little Flower used could only change the movement of time. It was not like what they were seeing now, in which they were caught in an endless loop. Even 9000 King did not talk about sacred power. The situation now only made people think of the time cycle. In a certain area, time kept looping, and time kept repeating itself. Time would not go forward. That was why the area around them kept on repeating. It was like the meat that was eaten. Because of the time cycling, it would return to how it was. The meat in the pot would appear again. Clearly, this was not just time recycling. There was space recycling involved too. Otherwise, if they walked out of the door, they would not come back unless the space around there was twisted too. It was like a Mobius strip that carried an infinite amount of space. The beginning and the end connected together. No matter how they entered or left, they could not escape the Holy Garden. Han-sun thought, if this really is a time cycle, it means that unless our power isn't enough to break the time and space powers in the Holy Garden, we cannot get out of here. 9000 King turned pale. His body kept on shaking. Although he was now free and a top elite in the universe, he was a servant of Sacred back then. Sacred Leader was still a very powerful figure at the forefront of his mind. After he thought about the Holy Garden being controlled by Sacred Leader's sacred power, he felt utterly hopeless. 9000 King, since we are trapped and cannot leave, why don't you tell me more about this sacred power? Let us figure a way out of her. Perhaps we can break through the Holy Garden's trap and escape this place. Han-sun wanted more information from 9000 King. 9000 King screamed and said, impossible. We cannot leave. Sacred Leader's sacred power can even trap a god spirit. We are all dead. Han-sun knew 9000 King was freaking out. He deliberately sounded cold as he said, no matter how strong sacred power was, Sacred Leader could not keep that power entirely in the Holy Garden. As you said, Sacred Leader loved his little sister. Why would he use sacred power to contain his little sister? When 9000 King heard Han-sun say that, his eyes turned bright. He said, right, Sacred Leader would not trap his little sister in here completely. That means there has to be a way for us to get out of here. What happened next made 9000 King's expression change again. He looked even more scared. No. The leader's little sister did not have much of a lifespan. The leader used sacred powers to control the Holy Garden. It is because he wanted to freeze his little sister in this time area, so she would never leave him, and always exist in this loop. Han-sun shook his head. If that is the case, then what is in the Holy Garden? Isn't that a statue? That would be Sacred Leader's little sister. 9000 King was frozen upon hearing that. He looked at Wanner's statue and said to himself, no. How could this happen? Why does a statue remain here? Where did Sacred Leader's sister go? The Holy Garden was not destroyed, and the sacred powers are still intact. If the leader's sister was trapped in here, she should still be around. 9000 King, we are in the same boat now, Han-sun said. If you know something, please tell us. The more heads we bang together to figure this out, the better. It is better than trying to work it out by yourself. 9000 King raised his head and looked at Han Senator. He gnashed his teeth and said, I already told you what I know. Regarding the other stuff, I don't really know much. There is a legend about sacred power. The legend says Sacred had a woman that figured out how to break the sacred power. Who was that woman? Han Sun asked with confusion. Han Yufei. 9000 King uttered a name that surprised Han Sr. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.